Today we're going to find out just how much you can do in BTD5 with nothing but tier 1 towers. And to make things interesting, we're going to be playing on Mastery and Poppable, which means that we'll always be just one leak away from losing, the balloons will be as fast as possible, all of our towers are really expensive, and to top it off, every balloon is going to be one rank higher than normal. This means the red balloons on round 1 are now turned into blues, the first ceramics on round 40 are now Moab balloons, and by round 60, you get to face your first ZOMG. So, our little tier 1 towers really have got their work cut out for them. However, I will be starting them off on a beginner map, and no, not express shipping, but rather the iconic map, Monkey Lane. And the goal for today is to see just how hard of a map that we can actually beat under this rule set. And I just want to give a quick shout out to somebody named Soup Monkey for actually suggesting this video on my YouTube Discord server, which you probably didn't even know existed, so the link to that will be in the pinned comments. Now, I honestly don't think that Monkey Lane should be too hard, especially considering that I have my entire Monkey Knowledge Laboratory maxed out, which allows us to start with 1050 cash instead of the standard 650. And just to be clear, I also have all of my premium upgrades unlocked, but I will not be using those because double cash is simply way too overpowered. But on round 1, I'm able to start with a 0-0 engineer, which I had positioned well enough to take care of the blue balloons quite easily, allowing me to turn it into a 1-0 when round 2 began, which gives the engineer its sentries. And because I also have its specialist building enabled, the engineer now produces super sentries that have a larger range and a higher rate of fire. If you didn't know, the 1-0 engineer is objectively the best tower to start with in BTD5, even if you aren't restricted to tier 1s. So honestly, it handled the early rounds quite easily, even for Mastery and Poppable. This allowed me to get my first banana farm, which unfortunately, I can only upgrade to a 1-0, thus decreasing its efficiency as normally you'd want to go for a 2-0 instead. But farming is definitely going to be important, and keep in mind, my Monkey Knowledge Lab also allows me to sell a tower for 99% of the price that it costs to purchase. So these farms only have to produce income for a single round to have already created me a profit if I do need to sell them off. This is especially important because in Mastery mode, your income generation from the balloons gets cut in half much more quickly than it normally would be. And I'm also using a banana farmer to collect the bananas for me, but I have it in a spot where it cannot actually interact with the track at all. Now on round 24, I had forgotten about the first camo, so I had to use a pile of road spikes, and then I figured I would get down a ninja monkey for future camos, but I instinctively upgraded it to a 2-1 by mistake, so obviously I reset the run here. On the second go, I got down a ninja in time for the first camo balloon, and managed to resist the temptation to upgrade it past a 1-1, and things were actually going pretty well. So I decided to get a village in order to begin saving money on towers, and of course, I can't give them camo detection since that's a tier 2 upgrade, but what I can do is still give them extra range and extra pierce. I actually managed to lose to a single red balloon when I had to face the first ceramics on round 35, but with a third 1-0 engineer, it went down without a problem. Now, things started getting interesting on round 37, where you would normally face camo white balloons, as they're now upgraded into camo lead balloons thanks to it being Mastery mode. Normally, there is actually no way for tier 1 towers to even pop camo leads, but thanks to their specialist buildings, we actually do have a way. Specifically, the ice tower can actually attack camo balloons as a 0-0 tower with its specialist building enabled, and even remove the camo from them once they thaw out. This is perfect because a tier 1 ice tower can't actually pop balloons, but what it can do is still freeze them and then have them thaw out and no longer be camo. Of course, I forgot the engineer was relying on its specialist building to actually pop lead balloons, so I had to get down a 1-1 wizard, and the ice towers definitely served their purpose, but the engineer was a lot weaker now without having its super sentries, so we actually leaked a yellow balloon. Now, hear me out, but I'm pretty sure our best bet is to actually get a 1-1 helicopter, because I think it might genuinely be the strongest tier 1 tower in the game, other than the super monkey, which obviously I'm not going to be able to afford yet. And yeah, sure enough, the helicopter got us through the round with no issues. But the ice monkeys quickly went from being essential to actually quite annoying, as they would freeze ceramic balloons, which kept the helicopters from being able to damage them until they had already gotten past the ice monkeys. And just as I was thinking about selling them, I got jump scared by the first Moabs on round 40. And to think, I was just saying Monkey Lane shouldn't be too difficult. So my next idea was to switch over to the Dartling Gunner specialist building, which will make that tower 5% cheaper, along with giving it extra attack speed and extra pierce as well. And then I sold the helicopters and village and built another village in the upper left corner to get the 10% discount from that, which I used to build as many 1-1 Dartling Gunners as I could. Once again, the ice monkeys got in the way, but once I sold those, we could actually get through the round without any issues. So I started getting more 1-0 farms that I could collect near the entrance because we're going to need all the extra money we can get here. But I also knew that round 43 was going to come with more Moabs, which were definitely a little bit tougher to take out, so after that, I focused my attention on getting more Dartling Gunners, which was smart considering we already have to face the first BFB on round 46. Thankfully, it actually went down pretty well. However, all the Moabs on round 47 proved to be a bit too much, but I did have a little money saved up, so I just got another Dartling Gunner and tried out again, which ended up working out. Round 49 was definitely a bit dicey, but we did pull through here, and after that, the Dartling Gunner really started cooking, which made it pretty easy to build up a small army of them in time for the first ZOMG on round 60. Now I was honestly a bit worried about this, but the Dartlings didn't have too much trouble taking it down. However, I had a feeling the true choke point was just a few rounds away from holding us up. You see, normally on round 63, you have to face 3 dense rushes of ceramic balloons, but now they're going to be turned into Moabs, and with each Moab producing 4 ceramics, that's going to be quite the undertaking. So, I was actually surprised when the Dartling Gunners even managed to take out the first wave of Moabs, but the problem is that they still have to focus on taking it down while the second wave has already emerged, giving it time to advance too much before we can actually attack it, which ended up allowing some balloons to escape from the second rush of Moabs. But when the idea for this video had come up in my Discord server, a player named David the Superior had said I'm most likely going to need to use super monkeys. Now, I had always thought that this tower was bad without plasma vision, but apparently there's an exclusive feature on this version of BTD5 where the laser vision actually gives the Super Monkey 2 projectiles, which I think it should do in every game considering the Super Monkey has 2 eyeballs to fire from, but this actually makes the laser vision a really good upgrade since it doubles the amount of projectiles and their pierce as well. So, I enabled the Super Monkey Specialist building, which will give it some extra range, and combined with the 1-1 Monkey Village, they can already see almost the entire map, which means we're not losing too much value in that regard either compared to the Dartling Gunner. But, when everything was said and done, the Super Monkeys arguably did a little bit worse against the Moabs, so I guess the 1-1 Dartling is still the overall king of value. Of course, it was really dumb of me to not just try putting all the Dartling Gunners under the range of a 0-1 village, because they'll benefit from the extra pierce a lot. So, I switched back to the Dartling Gunner Specialist building, built them all under the range of a couple 0-1 villages, and sure enough, the Dartling Gunners were now able to take down each wave of Moabs quickly enough to still have time for the next. And with round 63 out of the way, my next concern was round 65, which should have a solid amount of Moabs and BFBs at the end, along with a couple ZOMGs. But when the time came, our army of Dartling Gunners was able to prevail, and once again, we entered a period of relative calm, as the Dartling Gunners actually shredded through each round pretty comfortably. Having so much extra pierce really helps a lot as well, because we're able to shred through all the smaller stuff while still hitting the larger Moab class balloons that are behind it. Now the next round I was worried about was 76, where we're going to have to face another huge wave of Moabs, but it actually went down easier than expected. The Moab rushes on round 78 were definitely a bit tougher though, but still, we were able to take them down in time. Now at this point in the game, we are facing quite a few ZOMGs, and honestly, I'm surprised the Dartling Gunners are even keeping up. They did succumb to round 83 a couple times, but all I had to do was manage the Dartlings a little bit better, and I ended up making it through. But round 84 was a beast that I had been fearing, because it comes with 50 BFBs and 10 ZOMGs, which unsurprisingly took me out quite easily on my first try when I went up against them. And if I'm being honest, I really thought that all hope might be lost here. But then, I got surprisingly close on my third attempt already, which gave me all the hope that I actually needed. And on my fourth attempt, I had the miracle run. Now I seriously thought I was about to lose right here, but somehow the Dartlings just barely caught everything in time, and then again, right at the end, I expected to just barely get overwhelmed, but somehow we barely clutched up and actually beat round 84. And the thing is, round 85 only has 5 ZOMGs, just like it would on regular Improbable, which was an absolute breeze. I really wish you could hear the reaction I had when beating this because I genuinely popped off a little bit. And I hope that's worth subscribing for if you haven't already. But the question is, where do we go from here? I could always go back and pretend like my goal was to only beat Mastery Impossible on Monkey Lane and then start the video off with regular Impossible mode, but that would be straight up lying. And I'd be faking that entire part at the beginning to pretend like I didn't already know what was going to happen. So instead, I think it's time we turn on those premium upgrades and see what's actually possible for our tier 1 towers to truly achieve with no limitations. For our next map, I wanted a decent challenge, but nothing that would be straight up undoable, so I went with my favorite advanced map in the game, Cash Money. This will give us plenty of space to farm with as well, so that should definitely work out. Now our start looked pretty much the same as last time, only I now had enough money for a 1-0 engineer and a second 0-0 on the first round already. I upgraded that second NG to a 1-0 on round 2, then I set up my banana farmers, and on round 6, I was able to get my first 1-0 farm. This turned into 2 farms by round 10, 5 of them by round 15, with money to spare, and by round 19, it's fair to say, this is why double cash mode is so overpowered. Thus, it didn't take me long to have nearly the entire map filled with 1-0 farms, and once I had done that, I actually went and switched over to the Super Monkey Specialist building as opposed to the Dartling Gunners, because now that I have so much extra money, I should be able to afford to fill a good bit of the map with 1-1 Super Monkeys, which will be way more powerful compared to the total amount of space they take up in comparison to the Dartling Gunner. Keep in mind, we managed to fill all of Monkey Lane with 1-1 Dartling Gunners, which were just barely enough to beat it. Now you might notice, our village also got quite the buff in range thanks to our other premium upgrade, Bigger Beacons. And since I was losing my engineers and their ability to pop lead balloons now, I made sure to get down some 1-1 wizard monkeys, which I set to close because I'm pretty sure that makes their fireball upgrade more effective. But needless to say, despite playing on an objectively harder map, this run is a totally different world compared to the first one we just did. I did forget about the camo leads on round 37, so I switched over to the Ice Monkey Specialist building in order to decamo them, and I'll admit, I then left the Ice Monkey Specialist building active for longer than I needed to, simply because I wasn't sure if there would actually be any more camo leads coming up. Now in round 40, I had to buy more defense after I actually lost for the first time, but this was absolutely no problem. And as you might imagine, everything from this point onwards was nothing but smooth sailing. Once I finally did switch back to the Super Monkey Specialist building, I sold off the Ninja Monkeys and Ice Towers, which you might think means I have no camo detection, but the Super Monkey Specialist building actually gives them the ability to pop camo balloons as a 0-0 tower, which is something they normally cannot do on their own without being upgraded all the way to a temple. Now for the rest of the run, literally all I did was keep on filling up the map with 1-1 Super Monkeys, and eventually, I noticed they actually did get pretty close to losing on round 78, but we have so much extra money that I genuinely wasn't worried at all. And I'm sorry I didn't try to build up the suspense or something, but I mean it's hard to pretend that there's a real chance of losing when you're getting through the run so comfortably. Before round 84 began, I did make sure to really prepare and actually sell off farms to get some more space, along with me spending all the money I had. And I mean, the balloons made a little bit of progress, but honestly, they did not get all that far, even on this insane round. And thus, beating Cash Money really wasn't a challenge at all now that I have premium upgrades enabled. So, at the risk of getting absolutely humbled, let's step up the difficulty, this time with an expert map that's called Runway. This is genuinely one of the more difficult maps in the game. I mean, it's no Tar Pits or Death Valley, but I'm interested to see what happens for sure. Now once again, I began with the simple engineer start, before I began getting my banana farmers in place, and you know the rest. I did try to play a little bit smarter this time by actually getting my village down earlier so the rest of the farms I built could appreciate the 10% discount, and I also figured that it doesn't matter if I place down banana farms that overlap with the track if the balloons can't actually reach that part of the track anyways, so that way I can have banana farmers up here without having to worry about missing bananas like I was during the last 2 runs. But on round 35, the first ceramics were about to escape, so I had to quit out of the game and switch over to the Super Monkey Specialist building, knowing full well that I was going to have to switch to the Ice one in just 2 rounds. Still, I wanted that extra 5% discount that you get from every Tower Specialist building at level 1. And the 1-1 Super Monkeys were enough to easily shred through the ceramics as well, which allowed me to continue forward, using the ice to decamo the leads once again when I got to round 37, and this time, I immediately switched back to the Super Monkey Specialist building because I'm pretty certain those are the only camo leads of the entire game. And I have to admit, there were a couple rounds where the banana farmers did fire banana peels at the Moab class balloons, although I don't think they actually got the chance to affect anything because they can't actually do anything to the Moab class. But still, I tried moving them around to avoid this before it all came to a head on round 63, where the Moab Rush made it far enough to where the banana farmers at the top of the track definitely were getting a chance to potentially affect ceramics. So I quit out of the game and loaded back in, then sold the farmers at the top and began circling my mouse around the screen to try to avoid missing anything. But I really have to say, I'm surprised the only thing slowing me down at this point are my own silly little mistakes. And what I mean is that I expected this track to actually be somewhat of a challenge, but still, we're taking it down quite comfortably. In fact, probably even more so than on Cash Money. Now, when we were about to begin round 78, I did make sure to prepare more defense, which was enough to absolutely shred through the round. And I did the same thing before round 84, selling off all my farms to prepare the most defense possible, and yeah, needless to say, it went down without giving us any trouble. And thus, we have yet another testament to the absolute power of double cash. And I really want to know, what is the toughest map you're capable of beating with or without the premium upgrades enabled? This is a challenge for the whole community, and I will share the top result in a community post 1 week from today. I also want to give a huge shout out to my channel members. It genuinely means the world to me that so many people have joined recently, and even more crazy is that a few people are actually in the highest tier, ZOMG Zapper, or 2 people specifically, so massive shout out to Eric Hero and Love and Cody, along with everyone else who supports the channel, including all of you, by watching to the end of this video. And if you enjoyed it, you might also want to know if it's possible to beat the game with nothing but 0-0 towers. Yeah, believe it or not, I actually did that several months ago. Today we're going to find out just how far you can get in BTD5 using only one of each tower in the game. Of course, this means I won't be allowed to use any special agents either, with the exception of one portable lake, since the map we're playing on, Express Shipping, doesn't have any water available to place our Monkey Sub or the Buccaneer. Now on round 1, I'm going to immediately start with the 0-0 banana farm, which is only possible because of the 400 extra starting cash that I get from my Monkey Knowledge Laboratory being maxed out. Additionally, I can also do a little trick here, where I wait for the farm to produce 2 bunches of bananas during the round, and then immediately sell and rebuy it, wait for it to produce another 2, and do the same thing over and over until the balloons have exited the map. With Express Shipping being the longest map in the game, there was enough time to end round 1 with 806 cash, which includes the farm still producing bananas even once the round is ended. It's also important to note, this trick is only viable because of the fact that I get 99% of a tower's original price back every time I sell it, which is another perk of having a max monkey lab. Now on round 2, I'm just doing the same thing as I was on the first round, which allows me to end it with 1,413 cash, and by the end of round 3, I'm up to 2,092 cash. So I decided at this point to get a 1-0 engineer, and with its specialist building enabled, the engineer can now produce super sentries, which are known for being quite powerful against the early game, and that includes the addition of lead popping capability as well. And since I actually am popping the balloons now, the rounds will be much shorter, so I upgraded my farm to a 2-0 because there won't be enough time during the round to do the 0-0 farm trick. And of course, if I wanted to be extra efficient, I could have waited longer to get the engineer, but once you see the next phase of my plan, you'll realize that money is going to quickly become the least of our concerns. But the reason I'm using a 1-0 engineer is because it's a really cheap way to buy myself the time I need to save up for a 0-4 sniper. I upgraded the farm to a 3-0 so it would produce bananas more quickly, even though this upgrade is less efficient for its price than a 2-0 is, but that doesn't really matter when you're only limited to one farm at a time. Additionally, my plan wasn't actually to keep the farm anyways, but rather to sell it so that I could afford the supply crate sniper and begin using that to generate a bunch of extra cash. If you didn't know, this process is called sniper farming and involves buying a 0-4 sniper, using the ability to generate a crate of extra cash, and then immediately selling and rebuying the sniper to instantly get the ability back. Of course, the quicker you are at this, the better off you're going to be, and I'm far from being the best at micro myself, but it was enough to quickly start saving up a bit of extra cash, so then I switched over to using the helicopter supply crate upgrade, since this gives you a lot more cash and thus is a faster way to farm. And I spent the next several minutes getting as much extra cash as I could, but honestly, in retrospect, a lot of this was wasted time because all I was really planning to do is use the regrow rainbow balloons on round 42 to create a regrow farm with the tornado wizard and then have a ray of doom at the end to destroy all the balloons before they can escape. So farming nearly 300k definitely wasn't necessary. However, I did nearly mess up on round 42 the first time, as I ended up not selling my towers quickly enough, which actually destroyed all the regrow balloons, so I had to quit out of the game. Upon loading back in, things started off just fine until I quickly realized that I should actually switch over to the Dartling Gunner specialist building, as this will allow me to lock the tower in place, which will make the next part of my plan possible. You see, I could make this farm at least 5 times faster by simply upgrading the wizard to a 4th tier. However, if you've seen my video about how many balloons can you pop in 24 hours, you might remember that eventually, the game crashes when you run a regrow farm for too long. At the time, I suspected it was when you reach 100 million pops, because the game never expected the number to get that high. And based on these recent comments, I think that theory is correct. So, by using a 3rd tier wizard, I can have the farm only pop around 15 million balloons per hour, which then gives me several hours to farm extra lives from the support Chinook helicopter. If you aren't aware, the way this particular upgrade works is that it always gives you a supply crate full of cash on its first use, which is why it's possible to helicopter farm, and then a crate with extra lives on the second use, and it goes back and forth between these two infinitely. So yeah, basically, what I have to do is just keep on pressing the number 2 on my keyboard to activate the ability once the cooldown ends, and try to generate as many extra lives as I can before the farm reaches 100 million total pops. Now of course, this is easier said than done, and the monotony already started sinking in on me by the time I had reached about the 10% mark. I did get up to over 11,000 lives already, but in my state of boredom, I made a pretty big oopsie. After pausing the game, I was going to stop the recording for a minute, and ended up mindlessly exiting out of BTD5, which means my progress was now reset to the start of round 42. Now, I know it was only 10%, but that loss made me realize just how long it was going to take to actually reach 100 million pops. So I did something that I've never done before, which is using a speed hack to actually make the game faster for this part. At first I tried 10 times, but this was actually a bit too fast, I think because the game was now processing a regrow farm 10 times more quickly as well, which meant I could no longer activate abilities. So then I brought it down to 5x, which did work, and I ended up tweaking it until I got to the magic number of 6.6 times speed. Now, I understand if you aren't a big fan of using the speed up function, but I'm going to show the OBS window at the end, so you can see that even with this help, it still took multiple hours to reach the 100 million pop mark. You might also notice our life pacing is a bit worse now, as before I was able to farm a bit over 1 life per 1000 pops, whereas now, I'm a bit under this mark. I'm going to guess that the main reason for this is because every time I miss the timing, my mistake is amplified by 3.3 times. I'd say 3.3 because the game's own fast forward function no longer works when you're using a speed hack, so if fast forward was enabled, the game would only be 3.3 times slower than it is currently. In any case, if someone wants to send me a decent auto-hotkey script, I'd be more than happy to run the game at normal speed for as many hours as it takes for a challenge like this. But unfortunately, I had already injured my left wrist a few days before, so it just would have been extremely difficult to farm extra lives for nearly 10 hours straight. Still though, by the end of it, I had spent just about 3.5 hours activating the helicopter supply crate ability, while the regrow farm got up to about 99 million pops, and this is why I said money was going to be the least of our concerns, because in addition to farming just under 86,000 lives, I also managed to generate 54 million cash thanks to all the balloons I popped. And while running this farm, I even went from rank 83 all the way up to 86. So now the question is, which 4th tier do I pick for every tower? Well, starting with the Dart Monkey, I think having one Juggernaut to help catch ceramics at the end is going to be a bit more valuable than having a single triple dart that can sometimes be converted into a Super Monkey. So I'm putting a Juggernaut here on this straight path at the end of the map. Now, when it comes to the tack shooter, I think the Blade Maelstrom ability is overall going to be better than the Ring of Fire would be, and I'm placing that towards the upper left, where ideally, the ability can do the most damage. I'm also going to have to decide which village is worth getting pretty soon, but as for the sniper, I'm going to go with the Cripple Moab over the semi-auto. Since we only get to have one sniper, I think being able to stun a ZOMG will definitely be the most valuable thing we can get out of it. When it comes to the Boomerang, I'm going with the Turbocharge ability, simply because I don't think the Glaive Lord is going to be capable of dealing much damage to the Moab class balloons. Now with the Ninja Monkey, we have our first choice that is super obvious, because even though the Bloon Jitsu can deal a much higher damage per second itself, compared to the Bloon Sabotage ability, that ability can slow down all newly spawned balloons by 50% for 15 seconds, which is incredibly valuable to effectively give every tower double the time to deal damage while the ability is active. I put the ninja near the end of the track because I'm hoping the flash bomb can catch some of the balloons before they escape as well. With the bomb tower, I'm going with the Moab assassin ability because that is simply going to be a lot more effective against Moab class balloons, and just like with the ninja, I'm getting the absolute zero ice tower because it comes with an activated ability that can briefly slow down all balloons on screen, which also includes UMGs. With the glue, it doesn't really matter too much because this tower can't affect Moab class balloons in this game regardless, but I went with the 2-4 glue striker since that has an activated ability that can glue all non-Moab class balloons on screen, which could help us catch some ceramics. The reason I have it at the bottom is because I don't want to slow down ceramics too early and have them get in the way when towers like the bomb shooter are trying to deal damage to Moab class balloons. So the next tower I want to get is a Buccaneer, which of course means I have to put down a portable lake. And for this tower, I'm going to get the 4-2 aircraft carrier as it deals a much higher damage per second, but if I end up losing to Moabs or BFBs, I'll definitely try microing the 2-4 grappling hook ability, which can sink any single balloon up to a BFB. However, there's a different ability that I'm mainly planning to focus my micro on, which I'll get to in just a minute. But as for the Super Monkey, I have another tough decision to make because ultimately, if I went with the temple, I would have to sacrifice several of my towers, and none of them would be very close to the $30,000 mark that you need in order to gain the maximum possible strength for your temple. So I actually think it might be better to use a technological terror up here in the upper left corner, where its ability can potentially be microed to keep dealing 1000 damage to all the balloons as they have to travel around it. For the wizard, I'm going with the Phoenix because, well, my name is Phenomics, but no, seriously, I'm expecting that to be a lot more effective overall, and I still gotta replace the boomerang I sold to put down my super monkey, but also, I completely skipped over the monkey ace. Now for this tower, I'm going with the ground zero, since it comes with an activated ability that can deal 350 damage to every single balloon on screen at once, which is probably the main ability that I'm going to actually try microing during this run. Now for the village, I gave it some thought and decided the call to arms would be better over the energy beacon because reduced ability cooldowns are nice, but in this game, you can instantly get an ability back by selling and rebuying a tower anyways, so I think that having all these towers up here, under the effect of the call to arms ability, will be more valuable. Now with the farm, I mean, this tower literally can't do anything to the balloons, but I'll get a factory down here in the corner just for the fun of it. With the mortar, I'm going with the big one for now, and positioning it in the upper left corner, where balloons spend the most time. But the other 4th tier does come with an ability that stuns all balloons on screen for a second, so I will try that out if the ace ability doesn't prove to be effective enough. Now for the Darling Gunner, I think the best spot is actually right here where I put the banana farm, so let me get that out of the way, and I'm going with the Ray of Doom over the bed, mainly because I think all the extra pierce is going to help a lot when you only get a single Darling Gunner. With the Spike Factory, I'm going with the Spike Mines at the end of the track, although I am kind of curious if microing the Spike Storm ability could potentially be worthwhile later on. And then the helicopter gives us a really obvious choice, as the Apache Dart ship is far more powerful than the support Chinook, offensively speaking. For the engineer, I'm going with the 2-4 in order to get the overclock ability, which I'll probably use on the Super Monkey, assuming it's our biggest damage dealer. Then I'm going to get the 4-2 Bloon Chipper targeted to strong, and my thinking here is the same with the sniper, in that being able to stall an extra ZOMG is always really helpful. And finally, you have the sub, where I'm going with the first strike ability, as this provides a powerful activated ability that can deal 6,000 damage, which is spread across every balloon it hits. So, with every tower placed, and somewhat of a game plan moving forward, it's time to see just how far we can actually go. And I'm gonna let the game run at first without my input until we're about to start losing lives, in which case I will then begin using activated abilities. Oh wait, I should probably switch my specialist building, and I was gonna go with the Super Monkey one, but then I wasn't sure because all it really does is increase the tower's range if you don't have a temple, so maybe I should use the Bloon Chipper one to stun the balloons it releases, or maybe the Sniper one to get faster firing. I honestly don't know. Well, I guess for now I'll just stick with the Super Monkey's building because honestly I don't know what else to do. As you can probably imagine, the balloons we have to face at first were quite underpowered compared to the amount of defense we have built up, and thus it took quite a while for the balloons to even begin making it on screen. But alas, once we get past the round 85 mark, we enter true free play mode, and now every single round is going to consist of a random combination of ceramics, Moabs, BFBs, and ZOMGs, all of which will be getting faster every single round as well, along with the Moab class balloons also gaining extra health. So this is where things actually start to get real. And while the early free play rounds tend to be pretty easy, as they have a lower RBE and thus contain a lot less UMGs, once we got past the round 110 mark, the towers really began to struggle. The Spike Factory began having to catch some of the balloons before they could escape, and sure enough, I had to quit out of the game on round 117 as we had just lost a decent chunk of lives. Now that I've loaded back in, which gives me the lives back, it is time for me to start using all of our special abilities now and see just how much further that can get us. So I have to admit, it's pretty hard to manage like 13 or 14 different special abilities at once, and of course, some of them are a lot more valuable than others. So my main strategy was to use the Ninja Sabotage and Absolute Zero abilities to get the ZOMGs moving extremely slowly, and then I'd use the Tech Terror ability on them along with the Ground Zero. Then I would also go and use all the other abilities, which became extremely tough with the fact that hotkeys only work from 1 to 9, so there were a few abilities that I actually had to go and click on to use. Alas, this ended up not being quite as effective as you might expect, mainly because the free play speed and health ramping really starts to kick in pretty fast past the round 110 and 120 mark, and I ended up having to quit out of the game on round 129 when a ton of balloons were leaking. So then, there was only really one thing left to do, which is begin microing the Ace's Ground Zero ability, and at this point, I'm not going to worry about using any of the other special abilities besides the Ice and Ninja slowdowns, so I think it would make sense to switch a few of the other towers around. For instance, I could get a Glaive Lord down here in this curve, where I could hopefully catch the ceramics pretty well, because even though it's not good against Moab class balloons, it is really good against regular balloons, and I also really have to know whether or not it's worth it to just get the temple now, and then have it underneath the Call to Arms village, which I could activate in addition to the Vengeful Temple ability that we get from the Super Monkey Specialist building. What I'm going to do is try out this setup without microing the Ace ability, and see if it's better or worse than the previous setup was. Alright, at first I wasn't too sure, but it's pretty needless to say, this is way better than what I was doing before. Once you concentrate a Call to Arms and the Engineer's Overclock on the temple, along with it being able to further double its attack speed and give itself 2 beams with the Vengeful ability, it simply has way more power than everything else combined. Especially with the double slowdown from the Ninja and Ice, which lets me getting a lot further than I expected without even needing any micro from the Ace. In fact, I got all the way up to round 166 before finally losing some lives again, so now I'm going to have to slow down the game in order to begin microing the Ace's Ground Zero ability, and of course, I'm going to also make sure I'm still activating the other abilities given how powerful they have proven to be. Well, the Moab Assassin and First Strike I'm less worried about, but everything else will be important for sure. And so, I micro the Ace as well as I could, while also managing all the other abilities, and for a while, this was going pretty well. And sometimes, I could even get in the zone and really time all the abilities well, but pretty soon, my wrist began getting pretty sore, as I was around 50 minutes in at this point, and I've only gone from around 166 up to 180 in that time. So I figured I could skip a few rounds to at least save myself from totally getting carpal tunnel. I only skipped up to round 190, which still went down pretty well, so then I went up to round 196, and at this point, the balloons are definitely a bit faster and stronger than they were before, but I'm still able to take them down. However, my wrist really is getting a bit tired, and I've been using my touchpad this entire time, which certainly doesn't help, so let me rest my hands for a couple minutes, and then I'll come back to it. Honestly, I was hoping the rest would be more effective than it was, but at this point, my arm is just really tired, and I ended up leaking some lives for the first time on round 199. I'm doing my best to maintain the ability micro, but pretty soon, I lost a ton of lives on round 203 because I just couldn't keep up anymore, so I'm gonna have to quit out of the game here and actually rest for a little while. After a few hours, I came back to it, but I think it's fair to say, I was already close to losing even when I left, and sure enough, with my micro simply not being the best, I already struggled to keep up with the balloons past the round 200 mark and ended up losing to round 208, although clearly I was messing up a lot. So I'm going to give it one more try, and even just getting 5 more rounds has already taken over 30 minutes, and unfortunately, on my second try, I still wasn't able to get past round 208. Now, I would love to see what the BTD5 community is capable of, if someone has better micro or knows a better strategy than what I used here today, but I'm still pretty happy with this mark overall, and I actually want to give a shout out to somebody who just joined the highest level of channel membership that I have, ZOMG Zapper. I seriously appreciate that a ton, and giving you a shout out is actually the least I can do. And I also want to thank Smooth and Shurkenlord, who have both been channel members for several months now. Smooth in particular you might recognize from the recent live stream, where he was gifting memberships as well. So with that said, huge appreciation to every one of them, and also to everybody who donated during that live stream. That was absolutely insane, and it was something I never expected, so if you did donate, please do leave a comment on this video. I know there were a lot of people, and I didn't catch everybody, but some of them were like Candy Skill. Him and Micah were the two top donators, and they both hit insane numbers. Like, I seriously cannot believe their generosity, if I'm being honest. We had Butterman, we had Dippy Guy, we had, I think, somebody... trying to remember, we had somebody named Emerald was the first person to donate, and we had a lot more people as well. We had Sylvia. I'm just trying to think of everybody off the top of my head. We had Spooky donated, and there were more people as well. So if I didn't catch everybody, I know I didn't. I'm really sorry about that. I was honestly getting really tired towards the end of the stream, so I just did not catch everything, and also it was, 22 hours. So yeah, that's on me though. And next time I'm going to keep better track of that. So I really do appreciate everybody who made that such an amazing live stream. And with that being said, huge shout out to all of you who are watching this video as well and made 2024 such a great first year for the channel. It genuinely means a lot to have one of the best communities on all of YouTube. And if you enjoyed this video, you might also want to know how far a max temple can get on every map in BTD5. Today we're going to find out just how far every special agent can go in BTD5, which are actually exclusive to this game, so it really should be interesting. And in order to do this, we're going to be playing on the longest map in the game, Express Shipping, along with choosing Easy Mode. It's important to note, I also have the Pro version of every special agent unlocked, which gives each of them an additional buff. However, even as a Pro, the Banana Farmer actually cannot deal damage to the balloons at all. Instead, it gains the ability to drop banana peels that send the balloons backwards, which doesn't even work until it's actually collected at least one bunch of bananas. So, our real first special agent is going to be the Ninja Kiwi. Like, literally, the Ninja Kiwi logo is actually a deployable special agent in this game. Now, actually filling the map with special agents is going to be quite a pain, because there is no hotkey to select them, so you have to bring your mouse down to the agent you want, and then of course, you're trying to place them precisely, so you have to completely realign your cursor to place the agent in just the right spot. All in all, it took me over 30 minutes to fill the entire map with Ninja Kiwis, so hopefully I've earned a like and sub for placing them all down without any mods to help make it easier. Now I just want to make sure I point this out. I will be placing one MIB village with enhanced range in the center of the map for every special agent, so none of them fail super early to camo or lead balloons. In all fairness, the Ninja Kiwi gets the ability to pop leads along with faster attacks as the Pro version, but I'm giving the MIB to every agent because the village also gives extra pierce, so I don't want certain agents like this one to be unfairly nerfed by not getting an MIB village. Now of course, you wouldn't expect the early balloons to be any sort of issue for an entire map filled with special agents, and you'd be right. In fact, I actually forgot about this, but the Ninja Kiwis can even send balloons backwards with their kicks. So the first ceramics on round 40 and 43 got trapped by the entrance and were easily destroyed. Of course, Moab class balloons are not affected by this, and the first one is about to come now, and I mean, they didn't do terribly against it, but honestly I was hoping it would get destroyed a lot faster. But to be fair, I guess I should have considered the fact that each Ninja Kiwi is only doing 1 damage with its attack, so I mean this is sort of just like a better version of a 0-0 tower. With that said, they did take out the round 60 BFB without any problems, and round 63, which is normally a good challenge with its 3 waves of densely packed ceramic balloons, ended up just getting trapped at the entrance instead, giving the Ninja Kiwis all the time they need to shred every balloon. It's also pretty fun to watch them actually destroying Moabs and BFBs, as all the resulting ceramics just get blasted back to the entrance by all the knockback kicks they're taking. But I am really wondering how this agent is going to do against the first ZOMG on round 85. Since they're only dealing 1 damage per attack, it's going to take tons of hits just to break the outer layer. However, the ZOMG is so big and slow, getting those hits isn't really too difficult, and now that the Ninja Kiwis have defeated it, we are officially entering the point where true free play begins. which means that each round from here on out will now have a random RBE, although it does start pretty low on round 86, and this RBE is comprised entirely of ceramics, Moabs, BFBs, and ZOMGs, which also come at you randomly. So I'll be giving each agent 3 strikes before it's officially out, that way at least RNG will play less of a factor. The Ninja Kiwi actually did a really good job at handling the early free play rounds though, and I think it's because despite only doing 1 damage to each balloon it hits, their attacks can pierce through many balloons at once. The Ninja Kiwis are able to hit a bunch of them at the same time. It also doesn't hurt that ceramics aren't getting any chance to escape either, and pretty soon, they had surpassed the round 100 mark. However, the RBE is ramping up quite a good bit at this point, which allows multiple waves of ZOMGs to be spawned in addition to a ton of BFBs. It's important to note that the balloons are also gaining speed and health every round past 85 as well, and on 111, the Ninja Kiwi failed for the first time. But at least they have 2 more tries to get a little bit further. Well, at least that's what I thought, until they actually failed 2 more times to the very same round. So I guess this is where the Ninja Kiwi Special Agent is officially out. Up next we have the Ratadactyl, which I think I'm saying right because it's supposed to be like a pterodactyl, but this is how it's spelled in comparison. So I don't think you'd pronounce it like Raridactyl because when they have made the first A and E, well, regardless though, this agent has a really interesting mechanic where each round, one of the eggs in its nest will hatch a bird, or well, I guess a ratadactyl, that can pop a large amount of balloons before having to return to the nest. I couldn't find what the exact number of balloons is on the wiki, but I do know the pro version allows them to pop a lot more than normal, so that should definitely help them get further. But for some reason, I thought this agent was way bigger than it actually is, so I'm gonna have to buy a lot more of them than I initially realized. Now you might also notice, each nest is emitting these musical notes from a boombox, which is a bit annoying because all the particles get in my way, but more importantly, I'm worried this is going to potentially contribute to lag, especially with all the ratadactyls flying around as well. Now on round 1, they actually have to leak the first balloons because an egg cannot hatch from each nest until they've gone through a whole round. However, once the ratadactyls started spawning, it looks absolutely ridiculous. And honestly, super trippy, almost like one of those optical illusion videos you'd see on YouTube back in 2010. But yeah, I mean, there isn't much to see here gameplay wise, because all the ratadactyls are kind of in the way, but for the early game, it's going to destroy every balloon before they can make any progress, which means almost none of the ratadactyls are getting sent back to their nest yet. Now I was actually kind of worried that they might not be able to attack Moab class balloons, but thankfully, this is not the case, and it wasn't long before the first BFB was also taken down, just like the first Moab, without really even getting to make any progress whatsoever. Which also happened to the round 63 ceramics. In fact, not even the ZOMG was enough to really send many of the ratadactyls back to their nest, so I'm really wondering what they'll actually be able to do in free play. And at first, they were keeping all the balloons really far back because every nest had the maximum of 5 ratadactyls spawned. However, as the balloons chipped away at them, only 1 new ratadactyl was going to spawn on the next round, so basically, it was a matter of the balloons just carving their way down the track bit by bit until round 117, where they finally broke through for the first time. Thankfully though, the ratadactyl was able to actually survive round 117 on its second try, as it had a low enough RBE for the newly spawned ones to take care of everything. Since there are some ratadactyls left at the end of the track as well, I thought maybe we could survive another round, but 118 took them out once again, and then they did manage to beat both round 118 and round 119 before ultimately failing to round 120. Now it's time for the Tribal Turtle, which is much more like a traditional tower, as it throws 2 different projectiles in the form of spears and coconuts, the latter of which does extra damage to ceramics. And with the Pro version, you get double the rate of fire, as being a Pro allows the turtle to throw a projectile from each hand at the same time, instead of alternating between them with one hand. This agent is also a lot smaller than it looks, which allows you to fit quite a few more of them than you might really expect, and this includes the ability to actually fit them on the left side of express shipping, which no tower in the game can do. So I think I have over 400 of them in total, which should definitely be a big advantage in of itself. And sure enough, they absolutely shredded through the first Moab, especially compared to the Ninja Kiwi. And the turtles also took down the first BFB with great ease as well. Thanks to their coconut projectile, the round 63 ceramics never really stood a chance either. And eventually, I realized they can fit below the track at the bottom of the map as well, which is another spot that no tower can fit into. So that's even more firepower for the turtle, which was also able to destroy the round 85 ZOMG without breaking a sweat. So I'm really thinking this agent won't disappoint in free play either. And would you look at that? They can also fit above the top of the track, so let me get that filled in as well. I think this might be the first ever green border of a map in BTD as opposed to a black border. And from just how easily the tribal turtle is still destroying everything past round 100, I really do believe it has a chance to take the record now. So, I went for a walk while on a call with my boy Subchub and let the turtles keep doing their thing until I got back. And it wasn't long before they were surpassing the record set by both the Ninja Kiwi and the Ratadactyl, and at this point, every round is going to have a really high RBE, along with the speed and health ramping on Moab class balloons getting quite noticeable as well. But the turtles did push through the round 130 mark and even past 140, like right past it, as they ended up failing for the first time on round 141. However, they were able to make it to round 145 on their second try, but unfortunately could not get any further with their third. The Bloons Day device works by giving you an activated ability which produces a super powerful beam of energy for a short time, and with enough of them, you can space out your use of each ability to keep multiple beams active at all times. Now this is the biggest special agent in the entire game, so we're not going to be able to fit that many of them, but it will definitely be enough for our purposes at least. Each beam of energy will follow wherever your mouse is positioned, so I'm just going to keep it in the upper left corner and let the balloons get instantly destroyed. You might also notice that each beam is leaving behind this trail of plasma, which also pops the balloons, and that's what the Bloons Day device gains as a pro agent. And the thing about this particular special agent is that it really doesn't play any games when it comes to popping the balloons. Did you see the first ceramics on round 40? No, you didn't, because they were instantly vaporized, and the first Moab disintegrated, while the first BFB obliterated. And as for the first ZOMG, well, it might as well have been the first ceramics because it got vaporized the same way they did. So, based off its performance so far, you'd really expect the Bloons Day device to go insanely far, or at least I did. Especially because the beam doesn't have to be directly on top of balloons to destroy them, instead dealing damage to a pretty wide area around it. So wide in fact, that it covers the entire upper left corner of track where balloons have to wrap around if you place your mouse towards the center of the square. So, I think this is probably the best spot to keep the beam positioned in order to make it as far as possible. But just how much further that is, I'm not really sure because you can see the rounds are already becoming quite difficult for the Bloons Day device now. And somehow, some way, they failed on exactly the same round as the tribal turtle, round 141. Now, I am going to try following the balloons around the track with the beams and seeing if that ends up being better than leaving it in place, although the first time I tried this, I didn't have any abilities immediately ready, so ceramics ended up escaping. What I had to do then is sell one of the Bloons Day devices and rebuy it so I would already have one ability ready, which allowed me to get my first beam out quickly enough to then keep the ceramics from leaking. However, I quickly found that the beam follows your mouse way too slowly to actually be effective this way, so I do think leaving it in that spot is indeed the best move. Thus, its failure on round 141 does count as a strike, but these other two fails do not, as I was trying to test something else out. And with the cursor in the upper left corner, they ended up getting to round 143 on their second try, which is also where they ultimately failed after their third. Now it's time for the Meerkat Spy, which normally would be a waste of our time, as all it can do is grant camera detection to towers or other agents within its range. However, as a pro agent, the Meerkat Spy now has a laser attack that, get this, can one-shot any balloon, along with being able to quote-unquote put the hurt on Moab class balloons. But unlike the tribal turtle, this agent can't fit on the left or even on the right side of express shipping, as it has a larger hitbox, so I think only around 250 or so are able to fit on the map. And hey, wait a minute, they're definitely not one-shotting the balloons at all. No, the leads and zebras got turned into reds, which means they're actually doing 6 damage per shot, so I don't know why the description acts like they can one-shot regular balloons. I mean, that's what it says. But still, 6 damage is a solid amount, and it was enough to tear through the first Moab, along with the first BFB, and the ceramics on round 63 weren't an issue, but they definitely were making a bit of progress, especially compared to our last few agents. So I don't think the Meerkat is going to be as strong as I was hoping, since it can't actually one-shot the ceramics, but they did take down the round 85 ZOMG quite well, and survived through several free play rounds as well. However, you can probably tell how much more quickly they're already beginning to get overwhelmed, and sure enough, the Meerkat Spy had already failed for the first time on just round 96, the earliest of any special agent that's capable of dealing damage so far. On their second try, they were able to make it another 2 rounds to 98, and thankfully, the spies did at least break the 100 mark on their third attempt, ultimately failing to round 101. Now, here is where things start to get a little weird. The Bloonberry bush acts the same way that road items do in this game, meaning you can essentially place an infinite number of them directly on the track, which of course would deal infinite damage per round. So I'm kind of torn on what to actually do here, because I want to see the true limit of this agent obviously, but I have to stop somewhere as well, and I've settled on placing 1,000 of them. Each bush generates 10 thorns per round and can hold up to 200, with each thorn being worth 1 damage. So, with 1,000 Bloonberry bushes, we can store up to 200,000 damage at a time, and additionally, as a pro agent, each bush is going to create an extra creeper, which I'm assuming is some sort of plant term, every 3 rounds. And each of these creepers is able to store up to 15 extra damage as well. Of course, having thousands of creepers on the track in addition to the main bushes is going to start causing a great deal of lag. Every time 1,000 of them have to be produced at once, a pretty nice lag spike comes along with it, and as more and more were getting added to the track, the game quickly started to run quite poorly, leading to easy mode taking 3 or 4 times longer than it normally should. And then, it wouldn't even let me click on the free play button, and the game proceeded to crash. When I went back into BTD5 and tried to load the game with all the Bloonsberry bushes in it, it really struggled just to do so, and the game wouldn't even register me clicking the button that starts the next round. So I guess the true limit with this agent is just how much your PC can actually handle. And keep in mind, this game is coded in a way where it can only use 1 core of your CPU, so yeah, it's not ideal. But I'm gonna try 100 of these and see just how well that can do. Eventually, the creepers can end up dealing more damage than the Bloonberry bush itself, because the bush is capped to 200, but I don't think there's actually a limit to how many creepers it can create. At first, the Bloons didn't have nearly a high enough RB to actually make any significant progress. However, as we began facing rainbows and ceramics, the Bloons were able to destroy all the creepers and use up the thorns of the Bloonsberry bushes in the upper left corner. And after that, they continued carving their way further down the track, at first quite slowly, but as BFBs and huge ceramic rushes began entering the equation, the Bloons' progress towards the exit sped up quite a bit. And by round 82, 100 Bloonberry bushes ended up failing. Of course, trying a second time wouldn't help here, as they didn't make it to free play, and for some reason, there's also a weird visual bug where creepers appear to be on the track but aren't actually doing anything. The next special agent we're testing is the Beekeeper, which, true to its name, attacks the Bloons by attaching bees to them that I guess are stinging the Bloons over and over until they're popped. And thankfully, this damage is actually pretty quick, allowing the bees to easily take care of the early Bloons. However, they have a pretty major issue. An MIB village doesn't actually allow the Beekeeper to attack lead balloons, so this tower is going to fail on round— Wait, what just happened? How did they just pop those lead balloons? Oh, I get it now. The MIB doesn't allow the Beekeeper to send bees out at lead balloons, but it gives the actual bees themselves the ability to pop lead balloons still. So at the end of round 45, I'll just use the Bee Swarm activated ability, which the Beekeeper gains as a pro agent, as this allows it to send 100 bees out of the hive at once. However, the bees cannot actually attach to Moab class balloons, but the weird thing is that it looks like they can actually damage them if I swarm all of the bees at once. However, I tried this 3 times, and they could never actually pop the Moab quickly enough to also have time for the ceramic balloons. But if we're being fair, if I had known about the lead balloon thing before, I still would have had 600 lives on round 46, which actually is enough to survive the ceramic balloons leaking, thus allowing the Beekeeper to not fail until the next 2 Moabs come out on round 50. And now it's time to see just what the Angry Squirrel can do. This special agent is quite small. I mean, not like fitting on the left side of express shipping type of small, but they can fit on the right side, and I think I got around 400 of them on the map in total. Now, as a pro agent, each squirrel will temporarily go berserk after throwing 50 acorns, which gives it bigger range and allows it to attack faster. If the Angry Squirrel wasn't a pro, the only way for it to become berserk would actually be to leak lives, which did happen at first because I forgot to put down the MIB village, but thankfully, they only leaked a total of 18 lives, so it doesn't actually really matter. The Angry Squirrels easily took down the first BFB on round 60, especially with all their berserk modes activating, but on round 63, they had a lot more trouble, which tells me their attack must not have very good pierce, and it's just kind of disappointing because that means I already know the squirrel probably isn't going to make it very far in free play. Still though, they handled things well leading up to that point, including the first ZOMG, and the Angry Squirrels were also able to make some progress once they had entered free play, but it was almost identical to that of the Meerkat Spy, with them failing on round 98, and then twice more on 100. Honestly, this is probably my biggest letdown personally, because I thought the Berserk mode was going to make this agent actually really good. But I don't think anyone will be disappointed with the sheer potential of the next special agent, as we're now onto the Super Monkey Storm. Of course, in the early game, it's going to be absolutely overkill, but I don't have any choice other than to use them. If you don't know, the Super Monkey Storm does 500 damage to every single balloon on screen, and as a pro, you actually get a second storm of them after a brief delay as well. For the early game, I would just wait until the balloons stopped coming from the entrance, so that way, one Super Monkey Storm could take them all out. And pretty soon, the rounds were beginning to last long enough where I actually had to use 2 abilities to avoid leaking, but also, something kinda strange happened. The Moabs on round 46 and 50 were one-shotted like I expected, but after round 50, they began leaving behind rainbows. This makes no sense, because the Moabs don't begin gaining health until round 86, however, after round 50 on easy mode, ceramic balloons do stop spawning 2 rainbows, instead producing just 1, so I think it's an oversight with that part of the code. Thankfully though, a BFB does get taken down to 4 damage Moabs by a single storm, which does require 500 damage, so this agent should be working normally otherwise. And even now that we're past round 100, the Super Monkey Storm is obviously not going to struggle at all, because I can always just spam as many of them at a time as I want, so what I'm going to do is set up a defense that can survive for a really long time, and that way, we can test the Super Monkey Storm on something insane like round 400. Well, I ran out of money to upgrade the rest of my balloon shippers, but I think this will certainly do. Alright, now we're all the way up to round 335, so let's see just how many Super Monkey Storms that it takes just to defeat one round here. And I'm starting with 694 of them just for reference. Look at how fast the ceramics are now without me even having fast forward mode enabled. This is kind of insane. Not to mention, the ZOMGs are taking an insane amount of ability spam, but they are still going down with enough of them, and get this, just to make it through round 335, I had to use 618 of the Super Monkey Storms. So to get to round 1000, I think you'd need several million of these agents. But still, I mean, if you had an endless amount of them and click fast enough, the limit could be almost infinite. And now, it's time for the last special agent of the video, the Portable Lake. But wait, there's still another agent to the right of it, I imagine someone commenting. And you're right, but the Pontoon actually has no way to deal damage at all, even as a pro agent. However, the Portable Lake actually does, as it gains an activated ability which awakens a Kraken inside the lake that will strike the balloons and deal 5 damage. And I guess I was wrong when I said the Bloons Tower Defense is the biggest special agent, because it appears bigger, but the lake actually has an even larger hitbox. Oh, and apparently the Kraken only does 1 damage to balloons? I don't even understand why I bother trusting the descriptions in this game anymore. But yeah, the Portable Lake absolutely sucks, because it attacks slow, it only does 1 damage, you have no control over which lake you're activating, so you kind of have to use all the abilities at once, and they don't last very long compared to their cooldown time. So I already lost to Regrow Zebras on round 31. Yeah, they don't even have enough firepower to stop 2 Regrow Zebra balloons from becoming a farm. So I restarted the run, and starting on round 26, I would quit out of the game if I was losing lives, load back in, and replace all the lakes so I would have all 16 abilities immediately available again. And then I would try to mitigate the amount of lives I lost. And on round 31, I did manage to get by with only a few weak balloons leaking through, leaving me with nearly 500 lives in total, but as soon as the rounds began lasting a bit longer and had stronger balloons, I just couldn't find a way to win. I tried selling and rebuying some lakes in the middle of the round, but the main problem is I'm not quick enough to be effective while doing that, so I cannot even get past round 39 with them. But I want to see if the Portable Lake is able to attack Moab class balloons, so I'm going to use the Super Monkey to get to round 46. Alright, let's see, and oh, not only can they attack Moabs, but it appears they actually do the proper amount of damage to them as well. So that's just great. I mean, I still want to say the limit of this agent is somewhere before the first Moab, based on how terribly it does against regular balloons, but if you're able to pull something off, please do let me know. I want to give a shout out to Massive Power, who actually managed to beat round 85 with nothing but balloon chippers, when I had thought that was impossible 2 weeks ago. But now, let's take a look at our leaderboard. Technically speaking, the Super Monkey Storm and the Bloonberry Bush both had the potential to be infinite, but let's be real. the Bloonberry Bush is going to lag out anyone's PC eventually, so I really think the Super Monkey Storm is the true winner of this challenge. Now, as for the measurable towers, the Tribal Turtle made it the furthest with around 145, closely followed by the Bloons Day device at 143. Then you have a pretty big fall off with the Ratadactyl at 120, the Ninja Kiwi at 111, and then the Meerkat Spy and Angry Squirrel were quite close at around 101 and 100 respectively. Finally, you have the Beekeeper at around 50, the Portable Lake, which is kind of a question mark, but like probably fails by around 40ish I think. And finally, the Pontoon and Banana Farmer both max out at around 10 since they cannot deal damage. And if you enjoyed this video, you might also be interested to know how far every tower can go in BTD5. Bloons Tower Defense history has just been made in both the 6th game and now BTD5 as well, as on the 9th of January 2025, Super Blooner 1 would complete this absolutely historic run that made it all the way to round 4,115, which is really significant because it beats the previous record by over 1,100 rounds. And the craziest part? This might not even be that close to the true limit of what's ultimately possible in this game. So, how exactly did we get here? And beyond that, just how much further can BTD5 actually be pushed? Well, only time will answer that second question, but as for the first, we have to go all the way back to December of 2011, when BTD5 was first released. Already, there was a player by the name of Halebop who was regularly pushing to high rounds. In fact, before the new year, he had already gotten to around 200, but unfortunately, a video of that run no longer exists. However, what we do have is the run I'm showing you currently, which is actually a tutorial he posted on how to get to round 200 and beyond in this game all the way back on January 4th of 2012. And if we take a look at the video's description, it becomes pretty clear that Halebop was simply ahead of his time. He was one of, if not the first player to realize that the Monkey Temple is the strongest tower in the game compared to the amount of space it takes up, and he had already figured out which towers to sacrifice to it in order to create the strongest temple possible. I think we all owe this player, rather this BTD5 legend, some real credit for pretty much being the first person to test the limits of Bloons Tower Defense 5. Now in this video, he was playing on the beginner map Monkey Lane and using easy difficulty. However, just 6 days later, on January 10th, Halebop would post another video, and this one is pretty crazy. It's also a round 200 tutorial, only this time he's doing it on hard difficulty and he's playing on an expert map known as Clock as well. And as you can see, his defense isn't getting particularly close to losing either, so who knows just how far it could have actually survived. However, there is something very important to note here. It appears that in early 2012, BTD5 Freeplay didn't actually have the same ramping that it does today, where Moab class balloons gain extra health, and all balloons, including the Moab class, gain extra speed every single round once you enter Freeplay mode. And it's hard to tell exactly when this was added, but I believe it would have most likely been on March 22nd of 2012 when the game had an update that came with major balance changes. And while you might think that this is the reason Halebop could get so far, pretty soon you're going to see that the addition of Freeplay ramping was far from being enough to actually stop our boy. Now by February 26th, he had pushed his record all the way up to around 270, this time being played on Monkey Lane, but he was still using hard difficulty. And at the end of his run, you can actually see that this was first place for Monkey Lane on hard difficulty, and given how popular the map is, and the fact that there were only 21 tracks in BTD5 at this time, we can probably assume this was the overall record for hard difficulty as well. However, when we check out the description, there is a really important note, which is that with the newest update in BTD5, which would have happened 2 days before this video was posted, you could no longer place towers on the base of a monkey temple, which remains true until this very day. Maybe this was also the update that added Freeplay ramping, not the one on March 22nd, but Halebop makes no mention of that anywhere in the video's description. However, Halebop also said something else that's really interesting here as well, which is that unless Ninja Kiwi allows towers to be placed on the base of a temple again, it's not likely any new records will be set. Of course, in the context of this video, we all know that's certainly not the case, but what's really interesting is that Halebop himself managed to push the record all the way to round 401 by just April of 2012. And it looks like over the past few months, the strategy had changed quite a good bit as well, with the Moab Mullers and Ray of Dooms being dropped for technological terrors and spike storms. I also know that on March 22nd, the Energy Beacon Village was added to the game as well, which you might be able to see attacking the balloons amongst all the chaos that's going on. And I'm not sure what other upgrades had been added to the game since February, but clearly, round 270 was far from being the true limit. Apparently, this run also took at least 3 days to complete, which probably sounds insane right now, but by the end of this video, you might not be so impressed by that number. In any case, the second half of 2012 would actually see Halebop get some competition, with S2LT setting a record of around 446 on an unknown date in 2012, which unfortunately doesn't have an existing video. But in doing research for my video, I found something pretty interesting, which is a post on a website called Record Setter that claims someone named Tim J got to around 446, which they're calling a record on their website, but there's just one problem. They claim the record was set June 28th of 2014, which is impossible because there are 12-year-old comments on this record submission, and I'm recording this on January of 2025. So I think it's very possible that Tim J is actually the same guy as S2LT, and this is the record he had actually set back in 2012. But what we can verify is that on November 11th of 2012, a player by the name of Bloonproof would beat this record by exactly 1 round. And he literally sold all of his defense after beating round 447, so it's pretty obvious he could have gone even further if he had wanted to. Halebop would actually take his record back with round 452 on an unknown date in 2012, which unfortunately doesn't have an existing video. And then, things would go really quiet, with no new records being set for over a year, before a player named Big Cube Fan became the first person to ever reach round 500 on December 5th of 2013. And remember how I just said it took Halebop 3 days to reach round 400? Well, this run took 26, with round 500 alone lasting for 2 hours. So, this is where a bottleneck really started to form as to what was actually possible in BTD5, especially considering the fact that Big Cube Fan actually had his game crash on round 501 as well. And the thing is, you couldn't save your game once you entered free play mode either, so once the game crashed, that was it. Your run would be lost. Not to mention the fact that this also meant you could never close BTD5 either. So when you're talking about a 26-day run, that starts becoming a bit of an issue. So, with all of that in mind, BTD5 was seemingly pretty close to reaching its limit. On March 27th of 2014, Marche would increase the record up to round 512, and it's important to note, unlike Big Cube Fan, he actually played on hard difficulty as opposed to easy, which might have actually been a good thing, as in the video's description, Marche said that the rounds were taking him roughly 45 minutes each instead of the 2 hours it took for Big Cube Fan on round 500. So maybe the extra balloon speed from hard mode was able to help the rounds go more quickly. Or maybe not, as the next record of round 574, set by the Lapras Man on November 7th of 2014, would be played on easy mode again, and according to the description, he was able to reach round 551 just 12 days into the game. And, just like for Big Cube Fan, the Lapras Man would have his game crash as well, so at this point, it really seems like the only way to get further would simply be to get lucky with your own game not crashing before round 576. But you see, less than 2 weeks after this run was completed, something would happen to BTD5 that would change the course of high score runs forever. That's because on November 19th of 2014, BTD5 was officially ported to Steam. You see, up to this point, the version of BTD5 we've been covering was coded on a programming language known as Flash, which certainly has some limitations. However, the Steam version was coded on C++, the same language that's used for the Bedrock version of Minecraft. So needless to say, there is a lot more possible for a game that's coded in this language as opposed to Flash, which was used to create simple, free games online. Now it's important to note, BTD5 was already made available on the iOS App Store 2 years prior, on November 15th of 2012, but given the state of smartphones back then, it's fair to assume that reaching round 500 would have been just as hard on mobile as it was on the Flash version. However, now that there was a more optimized version of BTD5 available on PC, the Lapras Man would quickly take advantage of this opportunity as he pushed the record all the way up to round 1000 on May 23rd of 2015. And the advantage was immediately obvious, as it now took him less than 2 days to get to round 500, and the entire run itself took around 2 weeks. Additionally, rounds started taking over 10 minutes to complete near the 1000 mark, which is still a lot better than 45 minutes or 2 hours for a single round on the Flash version when you've only gotten halfway as far. The game also didn't crash once he beat round 1000 either. The Lapras man simply decided to sell all of his defense and end the run himself, noting in the description that he could have easily gotten past round 1100 with his current defense. Of course, not everything was perfect with the Steam version of BTD5, as Lapras also notes that eventually, the game would experience something called ability lag, where you actually get locked out of being able to use your special abilities for a long time, usually until after the current round ends. This is a problem that has become less prevalent today, as PCs have gotten better, but it continues affecting the Steam and mobile versions of the game. Of course, with the activated abilities Absolute Zero and Bloons Sabotage, you can significantly slow down all Bloons, including the Moab class, all the way up to ZOMGs, which gives your towers significantly more time to deal damage, and the Lapras man believed even back in May of 2015 that you could get to around 1500 if the game didn't experience ability lag. Now, this version of BTD5 wasn't just better for setting records because it wouldn't crash anymore, but rather, the game also got some new towers, which allows you to build a stronger defense, and it even introduced a major glitch that is going to become very important in just a second. But for his round 1000 run, the Lapras man did not use any glitches. Rather, he relied on the most broken tower in BTD history, the Bloon Chipper, which of course doesn't exist on the regular Flash version. The reason that this tower is so good is that when upgraded to the 4th tier on the left path, it can suck in any Bloon, including a ZOMG, and hold it in place while the temples are able to destroy it. This would be like having a relatively cheap tower in BTD6 that could just casually hold a bad Bloon in place indefinitely, so yeah, needless to say, every record going forward is going to be using this tower. This version of BTD5 also features a better version of the map Express Shipping, which is also the longest map on the Flash version. However, in that one, towers can only be placed directly on top of crates instead of anywhere on the map, which is why it wasn't used there. Instead, it had actually been discovered by the time Lapras man set his record that 3 times around is actually the best map for Flash. But considering the fact that Express Shipping is over twice as long as that map, with it now being a viable option on Steam, that of course made it even better. Additionally, you could now place towers around the base of a temple again, which hadn't been possible on Flash since early 2012. Which of course gives you more space to place towers regardless of the map you're playing on. But that glitch I had just been talking about was going to allow for something that had never been possible before, which is for monkey temples to have other temples sitting on their base. You see, when you create a monkey temple in BTD5 or 6, it sacrifices every tower within its range. So naturally, you can only fit so many temples on a map without having one temple sacrifice another. For example, when Lapras got to round 1000, he had managed to fit 12 temples, although it is certainly possible to fit more with better placements. But everything was changed on July 3rd of 2015 when the temple glitch would be exposed in a major way by none other than the Bloons YouTuber Super John Bombo, who used to be a BTD5 player before the 6th game came out. And even back when he posted this video in 2015, SJB already had over 200,000 subscribers, with this video getting 500,000 views. The reason this glitch is exclusive to the mobile and Steam version of BTD5 is because it uses an ability that you get from the helicopter, which allows it to move a tower from one spot to another and takes advantage of this ability to actually move the super monkeys around as they're being upgraded in order to get temples as close to each other as possible. And if you didn't know, the helicopter is not a tower that's available in the Flash version of the game. Now, needless to say, SJB had a whole lot more than 12 temples for his run, which interestingly, actually failed to exactly round 1001 without him even selling any of his defense. But he had been playing on the map Lobby, so naturally, on September 18th of 2015, the Lapras man would use this glitch to get all the way to around 1500 on Express Shipping, with him not getting very close to failing either. And over the next couple months, there were a couple people that managed to get past round 1000 without using the temple glitch, but nobody would beat round 1500 until Ada got to around 1700 on November 16th of 2015. Which also used temple stacking. So, it would seem that now, the strategy for BTD5 records had truly been optimized. You play on the Steam version of the game, choose the map Express Shipping, and stack as many temples as you can on top of each other, and then you fill the rest of the space up with Bloon Chippers. And sure enough, this would be reflected by the fact that Ada's record stood for the rest of 2015, all of 2016, and by 2017, the only interesting thing that had happened was a player who managed to get all the way to around 1,240 without temple stacking, and they played on the PS4 version of BTD5, which is the only time that the glitchless record, or any record for that matter, has been held on that version of the game. Although in 2018, things started to get a bit more interesting when a player by the name of Cruel Tricks managed to get to around 1,496 without any glitches, although we only have this screenshot of it from a discussion about high scores that started in 2015 on a Steam thread. But nearly 2 years after Cruel Tricks set this record, on February 1st of 2020, the current record holder, Super Blooner 1, would actually make his first appearance by becoming the first person to reach around 1,500 exactly without any glitches. However, there was something very major that most players had been overlooking up to this point. You see, the helicopter really is an all-star of record-setting runs here in BTD5, as it not only has the ability to move towers with its 4th tier upgrade on the right path, but it also gains the ability to generate crates filled with extra cash and extra lives as well. And on the 4th of November in 2020, something truly miraculous would happen, when a player by the name of Jort would completely redefine the way that high scores were achieved in this game, as he managed to, get this, make it all the way to around 2,728 without the temple stacking glitch. So how did he do it? Well, amongst his defense, Jort included some helicopters that he had constantly using their supply crate abilities in order to gain extra lives while the game was going on. And since the gameplay will last for hundreds of hours once you start going this far, he was able to surpass 30 million lives by the round 1,887 mark. Before this record, when people would lose, they weren't leaking entire ZOMGs, because the balloon shippers wouldn't let those escape. Instead, it was all the smaller stuff like ceramic balloons that would start to get through, which might only take a couple thousand lives or so at first. Thus, with millions of extra lives, Jort could afford to begin tanking those rounds very comfortably, and of course, as he got further and further, he would have begun bleeding lives more quickly as the balloons continued getting faster and stronger, but needless to say, life farming with the helicopter was really the key to pushing BTD5's late game to the next level. And sure enough, the next record that was set, which didn't come until over 2.5 years later, on June 27th of 2023, managed to reach around 3,000 without temple stacking either. This time, the person apparently farmed over 300 million lives, but all we really have are a couple screenshots unfortunately. However, to get that many extra lives, they must have used a new strategy for life farming, where you use the pro version of this special agent called the Banana Farmer, which, in addition to collecting bananas in crates for you, can also spit banana peels onto the track, which will send balloons backwards without actually damaging them. This allows you to infinitely stall around, or at least almost infinitely, as the farmer will actually crash the game eventually after about a week or so if you don't eventually end the round. This is the same strategy that was used by our current record holder, Super Blooner 1, in order to get to 250 million lives by just round 35. But how was this possibly enough to get an extra 1,114 rounds if the previous record holder supposedly farmed all the way to 300 million? Well, Super Blooner 1, also known as Mateo, was the first person to ever successfully combine excessive life farming with the temple stacking. You see, it's pretty easy for the temple glitch to actually crash the game, so other people had tried to combine the two of them before, but they either gave up or managed to literally brick their save files. It's also really important to note that if we go back to the one record that was ever set on the PS4 back in 2017, the description of that video mentions how they could have gotten further if they had used the helicopter to farm extra lives, which just goes to show that people were aware of these things for a long time, but it took a truly special person to actually see the new strategies all the way through. And that is exactly what we have just gotten with Mateo's run. Now, it's really important to note, amongst all the advantages that come with the Steam and mobile versions of BTD5 is the fact that you can now save your game once you've entered free play mode, which was never possible in the Flash version. And this version of the game even auto-saves for you every single round, so if you ever need to close BTD5 or the game does happen to actually crash, your run will have been saved on the last round that you successfully completed. And this is really important, because we've actually reached the point where Steam records now take longer to set than records on Flash do, even with how much faster the Steam version runs. For example, the longest record we covered from Flash big Cube fans' round 500 run took him 26 days. However, Mateo started farming extra lives on August 7th of 2024 and reportedly spent an entire month doing this before he actually got bored and decided to quit the run for a while. Keep in mind, that was 1 month just to farm the 250 million extra lives that he used for his run. And once he came back to it on December 7th, Mateo began setting up a worthy defense, which mainly consisted of a bunch of stacked temples along with balloon shippers in the upper left corner. In the rest of the space, he filled in more helicopters in order to farm some extra lives while the game was actually going, the same way that Jort did back in 2020. This allowed Mateo to ultimately reach just under 272 million lives by round 244 when he now had his defense fully set up. And from here, all there really was to do for him is simply be patient and hope that the temple stacking glitch doesn't end up messing up his save file anywhere down the line. And by round 2525, it was pretty clear that this run truly had the potential to be something special. Not only was Mateo getting pretty close to the round 3000 record now, but the reason I pointed out 2525 specifically is because this is actually when Mateo began to first start losing lives. And for reference, by round 2500, Jort had already lost millions upon millions of lives, whereas from round 2525 to 2730, Mateo lost less than a million. These were the same rounds that entirely ended Jort's run at 2729. So finally, we were getting to see the true power of a run where both major late game strategies had come together. And on December 25th of 2024, Mateo would officially become the new world record holder by surpassing the round 3000 mark. And honestly, I don't think anyone would have blamed him if he had stopped shortly after that. But being a true man of conviction, Mateo would run his computer 24 hours a day, and on January 6th, he reached the incredible mark of round 4000, with over 39 million lives still to his name. And it makes sense that this took so long, because with the rounds taking about 15 minutes apiece, you're limited to about 100 rounds of progress per day at the very most. Nothing highlights this better than the fact that this screenshot of round 4100 was sent a full 5 hours and 20 minutes before this screenshot where Mateo had finally lost to round 4115. In doing so, setting an incredible record that surely should be able to stand the test of time, at least for the next few years, right? Well, remember when I said how this record might not even be close to the true limit of BTD5? You might be thinking, that doesn't really make any sense, because realistically, what else is there left to do? Well, who said that Mateo had to stop farming lives when he got to 250 million? You see, the truth is, the game allows you to go a whole lot further than that. In fact, he could have kept going all the way until reaching the signed 32-bit integer limit of 2,147,483,647 lives. Although it'd be smart to stop a bit short of this exact number, as the way a signed integer works is that the first bit represents whether the number is positive or negative, and going over the maximum value it can store actually flips the first bit, which then makes the entire number negative. I'm not exactly sure what would happen in BTD5 if you did that, but I feel like there's a chance it might brick your save file or something, so definitely not a risk worth taking. But considering that it did take Mateo a full month just to farm 250 million lives, there's probably not anyone who's actually crazy enough to really push it all the way to the integer limit, right? I mean, maybe someone will go for 500 million one day, but even that, I can see taking quite... So yeah. As it turns out, before Mateo even began his run, Jort had already been working on getting to the integer limit with his own life farming. And you can see, he actually has a really clever setup in order to be able to get the farm working even on round 95, which is already free play mode. And in this video that's a bit over a week old now, where he was testing just how much ability lag the overclock adds, Jort was already nearing round 1800. And you might also notice he still isn't using temple stacking. Now I know what you're thinking, but Mateo himself has said that he believes Jort will still make it to round 5000 just from having the most lives possible. And considering my highest round in the game is only 1008, I'm certainly not going to question his math. And keep in mind, Jort is the same guy who beat the glitched record by over 1,000 rounds without glitches back in 2020. So I wouldn't put it past him to do it again. Of course, even if he does get past round 5000, Jort's run still won't be the ultimate limit of the game if it doesn't have temple stacking in it. So we can only really theorize how far a person could get with both strategies together, at least for the time being. But you know what's funny? there is actually a glitch that is at least twice as powerful as regular temple stacking, and while it's never been used for a record run, that would open the door to somebody going even further than what we already imagined was possible. Although I would imagine that the game becomes less stable with a glitch that's that powerful. So who knows if we'll ever even see it make its way into a record run. But what we do know is that somehow round 4114 still isn't the end of the story for BTD5. I guess that's why Ninja Kiwi made it so much harder to go ultra late game in BTD6. Today we're gonna find out just how far a max tempo can go on every single map in BTD5. That's right, all 73 of them. Wait, that number doesn't sound right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 98, 99, 100, 101 maps? Well, we'd better get started then. But first, I should tell you, I'm enabling the Super Monkey Specialist building, which will make the temple even stronger. This includes giving it an activated ability that I'll be showing you guys soon. Additionally, I also have my Monkey Knowledge Lab maxed out, so this will truly be the ultimate test of the Monkey Temple. Now of course, you can also sacrifice towers to it to make it even stronger, and specifically, in this game, it's $30,000 worth of Ice Monkeys, Wizard Monkeys, Glue Gunners, Mortar Towers, and other, which literally can be any other tower you want. But a temple can actually absorb jungle drums from a village to get a 15% attack speed bonus, so that's the other tower I'll be sacrificing. It's also important to note, if you sacrifice bombs instead of mortars, the temple will fire missiles 3 times more slowly. So now that we have all our sacrifices set up, let's make our first of many temples to come and see just how far it can go on BTD's most iconic map, Monkey Lane. Now, this should go without saying, but the early game is going to be absolutely no problem for it whatsoever, and while the temple is doing its thing, I just want to quickly let you know, I'm planning to stream for 24 hours straight on January 1st going into the 2nd, and I'll be starting at 4 AM Pacific time or 7 AM Eastern Standard, so if you happen to see me live that day, it'd be really cool to have you stop by. I'll drop more details on it towards the end of this video though. Now, my plan with the temple is to let it go as far as possible without using its ability, and then we'll see just how much further that gets it. Pretty soon, it was time to face the first ZOMG on round 85, which still doesn't give any trouble. And since the temple has pretty much infinite pierce, the early free play rounds were no issue either. In this game, after round 85, every round has a random RBE that consists of waves of ceramics, Moabs, BFBs, and ZOMGs. And while the temple was handling them all pretty well at first, it didn't take too long for the ZOMGs in particular to start becoming more difficult, as all of the Moab class balloons also gain health and speed every round past 85 as well. This began forcing the temple to chase the ZOMGs down, which usually means the tower is getting pretty close to failing. And sure enough, just one round later, on 119, the temple would fail for the first time. So now, it's time to use the Vengeful Temple activated ability, which briefly doubles attack speed and gives the temple 2 beams at once, so we can see just how much further that gets us. Okay, well, this is pretty underwhelming. Are we still just gonna fail in the same round? Well, at least I'm giving the temple 3 tries to go as far as possible in each map, in case it gets unlucky with one of the free play rounds having a particularly high RBE. And on its second attempt, the Monkey Lane temple did manage to get to round 122, and then it also failed to that same round on its third attempt. So yeah, I'm kinda disappointed with the Dark Temple ability now, honestly. But our next map is called Mosaic, and I'm trying to place the temple in the center of each map so that this test can be as objective as possible, but this one kinda has the track in our way, so I'm gonna have to get it as close to the center as I can. And if you end up enjoying this video, liking and subscribing really goes a long way to help it reach more people. As you can imagine, a project like this takes something like 80 hours to make, so I definitely appreciate the support. Now, I'm thinking Mosaic might be a little bit better for the temple than Monkey Lane was, because the track is laid out a lot more optimally. The way the balloons have to travel down long, straight paths will allow the temple to take better advantage of its pierce, in addition to the fact that they also cross the same part of the track a second time after going around these loops. And as we get into free play mode, where things actually start to matter, you start getting to see what I mean, because the balloons are actually making it far enough now. But honestly, I was kind of surprised this layout didn't help us more than it did, because this temple still failed on round 125 without the ability. Although I do think the Dark Temple could also be more effective with this map as well. As you can see, whenever I activate it, the temple is much better able to take advantage of the huge increase of its damage per second by wasting a lot less time chasing down ZOMGs. But the problem is, all that time where the Dark Temple can't be active. And on this map, it ended up failing on round 127 on its first try. Then on the second, the round was insanely difficult, and the temple still got really close to beating it but just couldn't quite close the round out. And then on our third try, the The temple simply had no chance whatsoever because the RBE was so high and a huge wave of ZOMGs came right at the end of it, so I guess round 127 is where it ultimately fails. Up next is the map Alpine Lake, and it's fair to say the temple is going to get past round 85 on every single beginner map, so that's where I've begun recording. And that still is true with Alpine Lake, but honestly, the temple is beginning to struggle a lot earlier on this map compared to the first two we've tested. I guess the track layout just isn't ideal for it. Like, are we even going to make it to round 100? This is already getting close in the mid 90s. But thankfully, the tempo was able to keep on pushing on, and it did actually surpass the round 100 mark, although these rounds are getting tougher and tougher. And on round 105, you can see the tempo just barely survived with this crazy clutch, and just one round later, it would end up failing without its activated ability. And with it, we were able to beat 106 and get an even crazier clutch on round 107, but again, just one round after clutching, the tempo failed with its dark ability for the first time. And on the second try, the tempo still failed to 108, and I honestly thought it had a good chance on the third attempt because the RBE was lower, but all the ZOMGs came out at the end of the round and still managed to overwhelm it. So yeah, this is going to be our lowest record so far by quite a bit. But I think this next map, Bobsleigh Run, should be a little bit better since it has a few straight paths for the temple to fire down, and as you can see, this track setup is allowing for the temple to easily hold all the balloons back towards the entrance during the early free play rounds. But something that I'm quickly starting to learn is that once you get past like round 110 or so, free play is already a lot tougher than it was just 15 rounds ago, and with that said, the temple had already failed by 115 without the Vengeful Temple ability, and with it, we were able to get to round 118, and you can see just how bad the end of this map is for the temple because even the Vengeful one couldn't catch balloons there, and sure enough, the second and third attempt both failed just one round later, with the third one being right as I managed to get the Vengeful Temple activated, so that was kind of annoying. Now we're on to a map called Dance Floor, which I believe was added to BTD5 pretty recently in order to celebrate the game's 10-year anniversary, which you can kind of tell based on the track's layout literally being a 10. And it also happens to be quite good for this particular challenge, as the entrance is set up in a straight line that's perfectly positioned for the temple to blast right down it, and even once the balloons start making it past this point, they have to make a turn up the map and then turn back down it, which stacks them on top of each other and allows the temple to continue taking advantage of all its peers. And it doesn't actually have to start chasing balloons until towards the halfway point of the map, but even here, the balloons loop around twice, allowing for more of them to be stacked on each other. All in all, this allowed the temple to make it all the way to around 126 without the Vengeful Temple ability, and then it was able to get up to 128, 129, and finally, around 130 while using it. Up next is the map Nazca Lines, which is the one I included during the intro of this video. And this is the first map that actually has balloons coming down two different paths at once, but thankfully, they're really close to each other at the entrance as they make up the legs of this monkey which comprises the track layout, and because of this, the temple's beam is able to basically cover both the paths at once regardless. Once the balloons make it past this point, the temple does begin having to chase them around the track, but thankfully, the layout of this map does tend to stack multiple paths of balloons on top of each other at times, which of course is a huge advantage for the temple as well. And you also have this final loop at the end, which does allow the temple to catch even more balloons, and ultimately, it was able to get all the way to around 129 without the Vengeful ability, which is definitely a new record. So now, we're poised to potentially set a new overall record as well. And using the ability only got us to 130 on our first attempt, but to be fair, I really think the massive ZOMG rush at the end of the round is what did us in here. However, the second attempt only got the temple one round further, to round 131, which it also failed to with its third attempt. So this map is the new record holder, but only by a single round. Our next map is sort of perfect for the holidays, with it being called Toyland. And beyond that, there isn't really too much to say about it honestly. This map doesn't have the best layout, because it forces the temple to chase pretty early, but the good thing is that the path goes up and then back down, so the temple's beam is able to shoot across two rows of balloons while it's having to chase them down at least. And once they get past the halfway point, the balloons then have to go up and back down, which allows for the same exact thing to happen. So with that being said, this ended up being a pretty decent map for the temple, despite not looking like it, and that allowed it to reach around 117 without the Dark Temple ability, before getting to round 122 with it. Although the temple couldn't get past this round with its second and third try, so this is where it'll ultimately have to settle. Now it's time for a map called Daffodil, which doesn't look too impressive, but it has this one loop that's absolutely insane. In fact, for a while, it almost seemed like the temple could defend infinite ZOMGs here. I mean, check out how well it's doing here on round 123. but just one round later, I was quickly proven wrong as the temple failed without its vengeful ability. The main problem is that as soon as any balloons get past the loop, the temple has to chase and doesn't have a good opportunity to catch everything. However, I did notice that the ability does seem to be quite a bit more effective on this map than it has been on some others, because it can blast all the balloons while they're stuck together in the loop, and it managed to get us to round 128 with our first attempt, and then an extra round with our second, which is also where the temple ultimately failed. The next map we're playing on is Parking Lot, which has a pretty decent layout for the temple, at least I think. It does have to chase down the balloons somewhat, but they go down a straight path and they kind of come towards the temple at certain points, which gives it a chance to fire down the path, and then they also have to return down it as well, which gives the temple ample time to destroy a good amount of balloons at once. And this allowed it to do well in the early free play rounds, continuing to look comfortable as it passed the 100 mark, and then the 110 mark, before ultimately failing to round 119. So now, let's see if we can at least get a few more rounds out of the Vengeful Temple ability. It seems to be decently effective on this map, especially when there's a chance to shred through a ton of ZOMGs at once, and on our first try, we were able to get to round 121, then 122, before ultimately making it to round 124. Now we're onto another map that's perfect for the winter season, as it features a prominent snowman in the middle of it. However, that means I can't place the temple in the center of the map at all, and have to settle for placing it next to the snowman instead. Now, the actual track layout looks really ideal for the temple though, as it features a prominent loop where it can easily shred through a ton of balloons, along with a few more loops past that point as well, so I had really high hopes for the temple here. And it did perform well, cruising past the 100, 110, and 120 mark, but you can see at this point, it is really starting to struggle, and the temple ended up failing to round 123. So now let's see how much further the Vengeful Temple can get us. Well, with it, we still just barely survived round 123, and then on round 124, the ZOMGs were just absolutely insane, and the temple simply had no chance against them. But on its second try, the temple did get luckier with an easier RBE on that round, but then proceeded to fail to round 125 on both its second and third try. Oasis is another map that has an obstruction in the middle, and I think this one is even more egregious than the snowman on the last map, so I got the temple as close to the center as I could, but it's definitely not ideal. But the actual map itself features a long, winding track that stacks the balloons on top of each other decently, although the temple never actually gets a great opportunity to fire down a straight path or into a loop. So, Oasis was probably a little bit below average, I would say, as the temple failed to round 115 without its vengeful ability, and then proceeded to have a really crazy save on round 116 once it did have the ability, another clutch on 117, before getting its first fail on round 118. And on its second attempt, the temple had yet another close save that got it through round 118, which has become a really common theme for some reason on this map, before it ultimately failed on both the second and third attempt at round 119. Up next we have a map called Bloom, which lets us get much closer to the center with our temple, and it also has a decent curve in the beginning, which allows the temple to shred through several different balloons at once. But as they started getting past this point, the temple had to chase pretty badly until the balloons reached the bottom right, where they stack on top of each other once again, giving it another opportunity to hold them back. And after that, the balloons also kind of have a bit of trouble escaping, because the track does the same thing here, with allowing the temple to hit several of them at once, and ultimately, this allowed it to reach round 121 without its ability. Honestly, I kind of expected more, given all of the advantages that this track seems to provide. With the Vengeful Temple ability, it got to round 123 on its first try, then 124 on the second, which also took out the temple on its third and final attempt. Present Delivery is yet another map that's perfect for the holiday season, although it's not so ideal for the temple, as it forces it to immediately chase the balloons. However, they do have to travel down and then back up in a straight line, which at least allows the temple to shoot through two different paths of balloons at once. And after that, they have to come at the temple in a straight line, which of course is perfect for it, especially with the fact that the temple can also hit balloons at the entrance from this point. Unfortunately though, once the balloons get past there, the temple has to chase them once again, and it ended up failing to round 116 without the vengeful ability. Once I started using it, the temple was able to reach round 118, which it also failed to a second time, before ultimately failing to round 119. Now I have to be honest with you guys, I expected Rabbit Holes to be the worst map we've tested so far, based on the overall layout and seemingly short track length, but I was quickly proven wrong, as the first loop allows the temples to hold the balloons back extremely well. Even though it has to start off by chasing balloons, at the halfway point, there is a nice straight path for the temple to fire down and destroy a solid amount of them at once. and even once they get past that part of it, the temple is able to hit a ton of balloons at once because they have to wrap around the loop a second time as well. So it wasn't too long before the Rabbit Hole's temple surpassed the mark set by the temple in Alpine Lake without even needing the Vengeful ability. The second loop also created a similar effect to the first, which allowed the temple to reach round 124 without its activated ability, and even here, it was only leaking small balloons. With the Vengeful Temple though, it was only able to get one round further, and I don't just mean on the first attempt, but with the second and third as well. Alright, I guess I really just never realized how many winter themed beginner maps there actually are, as we're now onto one called Snowy Backyard. And honestly, it kinda reminds me of a snowy version of Monkey Lane. There aren't any loops for the temple to take advantage of, but rather, a couple of straight paths that are well positioned for it to fire down and shred through many balloons at once. Towards the end of the map, the temple does have the chase, but the balloons do have to go straight right, and then immediately turn left, and then turn right again on a path directly below, which at least allows for 3 lanes of balloons to be shot through at once. And ultimately, the temple ended up reaching round 119 without its vengeful ability, and then it actually got super lucky on the next attempt, as round 119 only had one small wave of ZOMGs, which you almost never see past round 100. But then, things went back to normal, and round 120 just barely took out the Vengeful Temple on its first attempt, before going to round 122, and then 123 on its third and final try. And considering that's only one more round than Monkey Lane, I think my initial assessment was pretty fair. Now I expect this next map to do pretty well, as the balloons have to wrap around the temple 3 times in a row. Oh, and I should probably mention it's called Sprint Track, by the way. And there's also a decent straight line at the entrance which the temple can fire down and pierce through several balloons at once. However, I should have considered the fact that even though this map does stack 3 lanes of balloons on top of each other, the temple is still chasing them the entire time, so it was only able to reach round 110 without the Vengeful ability. And with it, we did get to round 113 on the first attempt, which is actually a pretty decent improvement for the ability, all things considered, but after that, we only got to round 114 on the second and third attempts. And now, it's time for my pride in joining BTD5, Express Shipping. I'm expecting this map to set a big record because it's by far the longest map of any in BTD5 and has been used to set the world record for the highest round in the game since it was added to it. Although, I have to say, the temple seems to be struggling a lot earlier than I expected here, and yeah, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it failed to just round 120 without the Vengeful ability. And even once I started using it, the temple failed to round 123 on its first attempt, along with its second, before ultimately failing to round 124 on its final try. So yeah, I don't know about you guys, but that's definitely going to be my biggest disappointment of this video, because I honestly expected like round 140 coming into this. But the show must go on, and I am expecting the temple to do a bit better on this next map, Checkers, as it has a layout that stacks the balloons on top of each other over and over, allowing the temple to shoot through many of them at once. Other than that though, there isn't really too much to say about it, as that basic idea is literally the entire map. But the temple was able to reach round 126 without the Vengeful ability, and with it, we ended up reaching round 130 on our first try, second try, and unfortunately, that was where it failed on the third and final attempt as well. And for some reason, there were a ton of ZOMGs on this final attempt in particular. Up next, we have a map called Skull Peak, and I got the temple as close to the center of it as I could. The beginning part of the track is good for the temple, as it allows it to fire down a straight path and take advantage of its piers, but after that, the track layout forces the temple to begin chasing the balloons until they reach this dock section in the middle. Once here, the balloons have to travel in another straight line that's head-on with the temple, and additionally, previous balloons that are just entering the dock also get hit at the same time. Thus, you can see on round 123, despite there being a bunch of ZOMGs at once, the temple was able to handle them pretty well once they reached this section. Unfortunately though, good things always have to come to an end, as round 128 took the temple down without its special ability. And just like with Checkers, the first attempt with the ability got us to round 130, which is where the temple ultimately failed after its second and third. Now we're onto a map called Lobby, and based on its layout, I expect this to be a worse version of Sprint Track. The straight path at the beginning doesn't even really help the temple because it's so short that it has to almost immediately begin chasing balloons regardless. However, once the balloons have wrapped around the track for the first time, they do have to go further down the path in order to reach the inside track, which actually does give the temple an advantage. And apparently, this was not only enough for it to surpass the worst record of the video so far, which was Alpine Lake with round 107, but it continued going strong as well, by also passing the Sprint Track temple itself without even needing the ability yet. And now that we're getting further into the tough free play rounds, I'm realizing that the way this track loops directly around the temple at the end is actually quite great for it, as this allows the beam to shred through a ton of balloons at once. In fact, on round 119, you can see just how well the temple can handle a bunch of ZOMGs at once because of this layout. Ultimately, I was quite surprised by the temple getting to round 126 without even needing the Vengeful ability, and with it, I wonder if we could potentially even set a new record. Well, maybe not, because on our first try, we failed to round 129, and unfortunately, just like we've seen with the last few tracks, the second and third tries didn't get us any further either. But still, this is way more impressive than what I was expecting, especially considering that Sprint Track was the second worst track in the game itself. 3 times around should be an interesting map, because, true to its name, the balloons have to circle around the temple 3 times on this relatively small loop, and there is also a straight path at the beginning, but that doesn't really do much to keep the temple from having to chase. And with that in mind, I wasn't sure how this map was actually going to turn out, because the loop is going to stack a lot of balloons on top of each other, but it's also quite small and forces the temple to chase a lot, and honestly I can say, things worked out to be a little bit above average, all things considered. The temple got to round 123 without the Vengeful ability, before making it to 124 on its first and second attempt, and thankfully, instead of also failing here with its third, the temple actually made it to round 126 instead. Alright, the amount of holiday themed beginner maps is starting to get kind of ridiculous, because this next one is literally called North Pole. The actual layout of the map has a small straight line at the entrance, but that doesn't really help the temple hold the balloons back. Instead, the next part of the track with this zigzag layout ends up stacking a lot of balloons on top of each other, which gives the temple a great opportunity to take advantage of its pierce. The runway was also solid for it as well, and allowed the temple to reach round 121 without the Vengeful ability. Then it failed again to this round because there were a ton of ZOMGs before making it to round 123, and finally 125. Now we're moving on to a map called Patch, which would have been perfect a few months ago for Halloween, and for some reason, it has a random pool in the center of it, so I had to place the temple next to that. The track layout itself is long and winding, which immediately forces the temple to chase balloons, but it is able to catch them as they come around each bend, along with getting to fire down a straight part of the track in the middle. Since the track does go back and forth, it also allows the temple to fire through multiple lanes of balloons while chasing them at least, and ultimately, it was able to reach round 119 without the Vengeful ability, before failing to it again on the first try with the ability, mainly because there were a ton of ZOMGs. Doesn't that sound familiar? And on the second try, the temple proceeded to make it to round 123 before reaching 125 on its third. And this feels kind of weird to say, but I think 6 extra rounds is actually one of the best results, if not the best, that we've seen from the Vengeful Temple ability so far. Up next we have a map called Maze, which for whatever reason also has a random pool in the middle, although you can barely even see it with the temple on top of it, but I have a feeling this map has the potential to become our new record holder, as it is one of the longest tracks in the game, and its layout stacks the balloons on top of each other, along with sending some of them towards the top, which gives the temple extra time to deal with everything as well. And sure enough, the round 100, 110, and 120 mark quickly fell, with the temple reaching round 127 without the Vengeful ability, which is already really good. And then with the ability, the temple got to round 131 on its first try, which ties Nazca lines for the highest round of any map so far. But unfortunately, it couldn't get any further with its second or third try, so we'll have to settle for a tie. This next map is called Fireworks, which I guess is a name based on how the track kind of looks like a firework explosion, but it should also be quite interesting for the temple, since each point on the map gives it 2 straight paths to fire down, which are close enough together near the point to be hit at the same time. So, I would think this map is just about perfect for the temple honestly, since it should almost never have to chase. And sure enough, it wasn't long before it had surpassed the round 125 mark, which is already pretty rare, especially without the Vengeful ability. And on round 128, you can really see just how effective the track layout actually is, and I believe this is now the furthest we have gotten without using the Vengeful temple so far. But honestly, I was expecting even more out of this track than what I got, as the temple went on to fail to round 130, and the Vengeful ability only got it 1 extra round on its first try, before bringing it to round 132 on the second, which is also where it ultimately settled. But still, this is a new record by 1 round at least, and now I realize that fireworks actually go off on the game over screen, which doesn't seem like the right thing to celebrate, but now the map's name makes sense. I think this next map we're on, Brick Wall, is pretty similar to Sprint Track and Lobby. There is a straight path at the beginning of the track, and then the balloons have to travel around the temple for a long time. The main difference though, is that instead of completing full loops, they have to travel on the outside of the wall first, then turn around and travel the whole inside of it before they can escape at the bottom. This allows for 2 paths of balloons to be stacked on top of each other, which definitely does help the temple out a little bit at least. Although this map still wasn't super impressive, with the temple reaching round 116 without the Vengeful ability, then getting to 117 on its first try, barely surviving it on the second, and ultimately settling on round 118 after its second and third attempt. Z Factor is a map I'm really curious about because the balloons have to travel around all these tiny circles, which should stack a bunch of them together, and I think the temple's beam should be wide enough to cover the entire width of the circles once the balloons are coming straight at it. And you can really see here, even at the beginning of the track, the temple isn't having to chase as much as you'd expect because the balloons are having to travel around each circle before making forward progress and all getting kind of stacked on top of each other. And before long, the tempo was surpassing the 110, 115, and round 120 mark, eventually settling on round 125 without the Vengeful Temple ability. And with it, we were able to get 6 more rounds on our first attempt, which made me think it had a shot at tying or even setting a new record, but unfortunately, just like many temples before, this one failed 2 more times to the same round, putting it into I believe a 3-way tie now for second place. And now we're onto the map Park Path, which has a track layout that reminds me of Lobby if it was just split in half. And with that kind of layout, the temple of course has to chase the balloons from the very start, although it can actually catch a decent amount of them when they come around the first and especially the second bend, as this also allows the temple to attack balloons that are coming from the entrance at the same time, along with the bend itself stacking a lot of balloons on top of each other. And I'd say this map was about average honestly, as the tempo got to around 120 without the Vengeful ability, and with it, we got to around 122 on the first attempt, 123 on the second, and 124 on the third. Up next, we've got yet another winter-themed map in the form of Ice Rink, and based on its layout, I'm thinking it should be one of the better maps in this video. The balloons have to come at the temple straight on, which allows it to pierce through a decent amount of them, and beyond that, there are also 3 different loops the balloons have to travel around, which have seemed to be really effective for the temple on previous maps. And sure enough, it wasn't long before it had surpassed the round 120 mark pretty easily, which is usually a good sign that will at least make it to 130. Without the Vengeful ability, the temple failed on round 127 though, but sure enough, it got to exactly round 130 on its first attempt and couldn't get any further with the second or third. Now I think Roswell is one of the coolest maps in this entire game because it's actually based around a real life incident that took place in the town of Roswell in New Mexico, and essentially, there are some conspiracies around alien activity occurring there, which is why this map features a crashed UFO and a sign that literally has an alien on it. As for the actual track layout, it really reminds me of Monkey Lane and Snowy Backyard, as it consists of straight paths that are connected with sharp, mostly 90-degree turns. And at first, it really seemed like the temple was going to fail to a very similar round on this map as it had on the 2 I just compared it with, as it first failed to round 122, and then was barely able to clutch this round with the Vengeful Temple ability before failing to round 123. But then, on the second attempt, rounds 123, 124, and 125 were all a little bit easier than you'd normally see past the 120 mark, so it wasn't until things went back to normal in round 126 that the temple would fail on both its second and third attempts. And just for reference, Monkey Lane went to 122, and Snowy Backyard was 123. And at long last, we have the final beginner map of the game, Space Truckin'. And I am pretty curious about this one because it has a very unique layout from all the other tracks in the game. Things start off pretty standard, with the balloons coming down a straight path from the entrance towards the temple, but then they have to travel around 3 different planets before making their escape towards the sun. I guess it's kind of similar to the map Lobby, but the balloons aren't actually circling in on the temple, so I don't really know what to compare it to. In any case though, I really wish there was more to say because the temple's performance here was honestly quite average, as it failed around 123, and then, with the Vengeful ability, it only got 1 more round on its first, second, and third attempt, albeit the third one was extremely close. And now, we have finally moved on to our first intermediate map of the video, which just so happens to be the newest map in the game currently as well, Dark Dungeon. And this is the first time we're going to see an actual unique feature with the map, as once the balloons reach this trapdoor, they'll disappear into it and re-emerge from the other one over here. You might also notice I started recording on round 50 instead of 86, but I still expect the intermediate maps to make it to free play, and this was mainly just done as a precaution for the first one. But Dark Dungeon quickly proved it's actually better than Alpine Lake, as it soon managed to surpass the round 110 mark before failing to 116 without the Vengeful Temple. And with it, we were able to reach round 118 on our first attempt, along with the second, before getting to 119 on the final one, which is still better than a few of the beginner maps honestly. Fast Track was also added to BTD5 pretty recently, and at first glance, you'd think it should have been a beginner map instead, because the track layout is pretty similar to something like Monkey Lane, but there is one key difference. Anytime the balloons pass over these arrows, which are actually conveyor belts, they move significantly faster than normal. But honestly, The first one isn't very helpful for the balloons, as it ends in an immediate 180-degree turn onto normal track, which makes it pretty easy for the temple to catch balloons near the entrance for a while. But once they get past that point, it does struggle a lot more with chasing balloons. However, they also tend to get stacked up on top of each other near the exit, so overall, this map was even better than Dark Dungeon, as the temple reached round 120 without even needing the Vengeful ability, and then proceeded to get to 123, 124, and finally, round 125. Now, Overthrown is a really special map in this game, because any tower placed on these thrones is able to attack 5 times faster than normal. So what we're going to do first is build a temple off the throne, see how far that can get, and then we'll see how much further it can go while sitting on one. The track layout itself is pretty terrible for the temple though, since balloons come at it from 2 different opposite sides of the track, so it has to keep on going back and forth, and additionally, they force the temple to immediately chase as well. The one saving grace here is that these 2 paths join into one briefly in the middle, so the temple can hold the balloons back somewhat at this point, and once the path does split again, the temple is actually able to cover both of them at once. And somehow, this was actually enough to still tie Alpine Lake's 108 mark without even needing the Vengeful Temple ability. Once I began using it, round 108 didn't have a single wave of ZOMGs, which has to be the highest round that's happened on so far, and ultimately, we were able to get to round 112 on the first try, which also took the temple out on its second, but the third attempt really shows how important RNG can be, as each wave of ZOMGs was spaced out from each other, thus allowing the temple to get its ability back in time and actually survive this round. But on 113, it would suffer its third strike. And now, I know we're all curious to see just how much better it's going to be with 5 times higher attack speed, and I gotta say, I'm not disappointed so far. The temple is absolutely shredding through the balloons once they reach the middle point. However, I was kind of surprised by just how quickly the temple already began struggling again, like, surely the balloons haven't gotten 5 times stronger already? So I don't know, maybe the buff doesn't apply to its main solar beam projectile, and it's only affecting the other projectiles that get added from the other tower sacrifices. In any case though, the temple got an extra 10 rounds without the Vengeful ability, before reaching round 126 on its first, second, and third try. It's really crazy that it only got 1 round further than Fast Track while using the throne. This next map, Lonely Heart, has a heart-shaped lake taking up the entire center of it. So in order to get the temple in the middle of the map, I decided to place it on a pontoon. The reason there are some extras is that I actually had to place some of the towers I was sacrificing on pontoons as well, in order to fit all of them within the Sun God's range when I turned it into a temple. Now, the track layout itself reminds me of a worse version of Sprint Track, although the last time I said that, I was proven quite wrong. But I mean, this map literally is just a heart-shaped version of Sprint Track, but with only 2 lanes instead of 3. And thus, the temple only got to round 107 without the Vengeful ability, although it did get to round 110 on its first try, and then 113 on its second, which is only 1 round short of Sprint Track. However, the temple couldn't get any further with its last try, so I was finally correct with the prediction, even if it's only by a single round. Autumn Leaves is a rather simple map when it comes to the track layout, and the path is a lot wider than that of most tracks, which I guess is to simulate the feel of a casual walking trail that you'd find in a park. But the straight paths do offer the temple a few opportunities to shoot through several balloons at once, including at the entrance, which always helps, but it also has to chase them anytime the paths aren't lined up favorably for the temple. And the map isn't quite as long as the beginner ones used to be, so the temple ended up failing for the first time on round 112, and then it got to 113 on its first try using the Vengeful ability, before getting to 115 on the second, and finally, round 116 with its final try. Forgotten Garden starts off with a large section of the track being covered like a greenhouse, which is able to shield the regular balloons from being attacked, but it's too small for the Moab class balloons, which leads to a ton of ceramics pouring out of the end of the greenhouse during these early free play rounds. At that point on the track, the balloons are traveling straight down, before having to turn up, and then going back down again, which does allow a bunch of them to get stacked on top of each other at once. And I didn't realize just how effective this was actually going to be for the temple, but as it goes to chase ceramics, it's also hitting several different lanes of more freshly spawned balloons, including the Moab class balloons that are just coming out of the entrance. Additionally, the temple can also catch the balloons when they're crossing the bridge, which is good since it can also hit balloons at the entrance from this point as well. So, all in all, Forgotten Garden ended up being better than most of the beginner maps, with the temple reaching round 126 without the Vengeful ability. And with it, we were able to get this really nice clutch on round 128, before failing to round 130 on the first try, along with the second, and then, the temple actually got lucky, with the third try being extremely easy for such a late round, which allowed it to end up reaching round 131. Now we're on to a map that's called Head in the Clouds, which is pretty unique compared to everything we've played on so far. If you look at where the track breaks up the clouds, you can actually see a city below as well. But the actual map itself forces the temple to pretty much immediately start chasing Bloons, until they reach the point where they have to face it head on, which allows the temple to hold the Bloons back for a little while at the very least. Past that though, it has to chase them again, and overall, this map wasn't great for the temple, but also was not the worst one so far either, as it was able to reach round 115 without the vengeful ability, then it failed to that round again because there were a ton of ZOMGs. On the second try, it got to round 116, and the game actually crashed for some reason, but when I loaded back into it, the temple failed to that round with both its second and third try. Up next, we've got the map Flooded Lane, which is literally a flooded version of Monkey Lane, so there isn't much to say about it honestly. Thankfully, there is a wooden raft in the center of the map, which is perfect for our temple to sit on. And just like you'd expect, the performance here was almost identical to that of Monkey Lane, with the temple failing on round 118 without the vengeful ability, and with it, we got to round 121 on the first, second, and third try. Now we're on the map Walk in the Park, which splits the Bloons into two paths with this circle here early on, forcing the temple to chase them, and then it also has to chase them at the bottom of the map while Bloons are trying to escape on the middle path as well. One thing that does help a little bit is the fact that the two paths do meet at a point here, and the middle path is lined up straight with the temple, but this is too little too late, as it failed to round 109 without the vengeful ability, before getting to round 110 on the first try, and then 112 on the second and third. Ancient Tomb is another map that isn't laid out very well for the temple, as the Bloons are split into two different paths that force it to chase them, while flipping back and forth. The temple can catch the Bloons somewhat at the top of the map, where the path comes at it straight on, and they also stack a bit after that, but it still failed on round 109 without the vengeful temple ability, then 110 on the first try with it, before failing to round 112 on the second and third try, which is exactly the same as the last map. Now I think Hearthside should help you all feel nice and cozy for the holiday seasons, with the Christmas tree, the random fish tank, and presents scattered about. But for the temple, it's a little less pleasant, as the Bloons are only held back a little bit by the fact that they have to enter on a straight path that faces the temple, and after that, it has to chase them for a while until they reach the bottom middle of the map, where you have the same situation as the entrance, but these really are the only two good points that the temple has to actually deal with the Bloons effectively. So, as you could imagine, this map wasn't much better than the last two, with the temple failing to round 113 without its vengeful ability, and somehow not managing to get past that round with the vengeful temple in any attempts, and I think that's the first time the ability got a 0 rounds worth of progress. And our next map is definitely a little bit less cozy than the last, with it being the Halloween themed map 6 feet, obviously referencing being buried 6 feet underground. And to be honest, I really thought this had a shot at being our worst map yet, because it's like a single lane version of Sprint Track basically. But somehow, despite the fact that the Bloons only wrap around a single time, the temple was still able to surpass not just the round 108 mark that Alpine Lake had failed to, but it went on to reach round 112 without the vengeful temple, and then, get this, it actually tied Sprint Track on its first try with it, and then surpassed it by one round on its second, with 115 also being the round it ultimately failed to. Now we're on to River Rapids, and I'm using a pontoon for the temple to be in the middle of this map, you just can't see it underneath the temple's base. But something we can all see together is the fact that intermediate maps consistently have a bit more of a difficult layout than the beginner maps did before, as this is another one that has two paths, which forces the temple to chase back and forth really early, and it can only really hold back mobs and BFBs at this middle point where the two paths meet. ZOMGs are too strong to be held back here, even during the early free play rounds, which forces the temple to basically rely on the straight path at the exit to catch all the Bloons, and that's a terrible situation for it, because the temple isn't able to damage anything until it gets to the very end of the track. Thus, it had its worst fails so far, taken out on just round 95 without the Vengeful Temple ability. But since we were still in a relatively early round, that ability was more effective than it normally would be, as it was only dealing with one or two waves of ZOMGs at first, which haven't gained much health or speed yet. So, the Vengeful Temple made the leap all the way to round 103, which is already the farthest jump this ability has given the temple, and then it went to get to round 105 on its second attempt, which is where it also ultimately settled. But at least finally, Alpine Lake can say there's one intermediate map worse than it. Wattle Trees is another map that forces the temple to immediately chase the Bloons, but at least they're all coming down a single track this time. And beyond that, the Bloons also have to come at the temple head on after a bit, which allows it to hold them back for a while, and they also have to travel around this loop, which of course allows it to shoot through many Bloons at once. So with that, in addition to the track being single lane and also relatively long, this was definitely one of the better intermediate maps, as the temple got all the way to round 120 without the Vengeful ability, and then 122 on its first, second, and third try with it. This next map we're on, Pyramids, has a pretty unique layout, and the balloons have to split into two paths to climb each side of the first pyramid, but they're still pretty close together, and these paths also meet in the middle at the top of the pyramid, so the balloons end up getting stacked on top of each other, making this a decent point to hold them back. But once they get past there, the temple basically has nothing besides the fact that it can fire down a straight line at the exit, which at least allows it to catch a decent amount of balloons before they escape, but once anything strong makes it far enough, the temple isn't going to be able to keep up, and it ultimately failed to round 113 without its vengeful ability, before getting to round 116 on its first and second try with it, and then 117 on its final. I'm starting to feel like a broken record, but Dune Sea is yet another map that splits the balloons into two paths and has the temple chasing them back and forth. And of course, the two paths meet in the middle as well, and this doesn't really help the temple very much since they immediately split back into two, sending the balloons around it on each side, and these two bends are pretty decent to catch them, but nothing great honestly. So ultimately, the temple ended up failing on round 105 without the vengeful ability, before tying Alpine Lakes round 108 on its first try with it, which is where the temple ultimately failed here as well. Alright, this is actually getting ridiculous now. Lava Fields is yet another map that splits the balloons into two paths at first, however it does have something the previous maps didn't, which is 3 solid loops where the temple can actually destroy lots of balloons at once. Now, they do split up on the loop, with half of the balloons going each way, but this really isn't too bad for the temple, as it can still catch a bunch of them at once, and ultimately, it ended up getting all the way to round 121 without the Vengeful Temple ability, and with it, we ended up getting to round 122 on the first try, and then 123 on the second and third. Finally, we have another single lane map, and get this, it doesn't even force the balloons to chase at the beginning. Instead, there's an immediate turn out of the entrance that stacks them on top of each other, and then they have to come straight at the temple as well, which was effective for holding them back. There is also one more point where the temple can catch balloons before they're about to escape, which allowed it to reach round 119 without the vengeful ability, and with it, the temple got to round 121 on its first, second, and third try. Country Road is arguably the most unique map we've encountered so far, as it has the balloons come from a different path every round, with them following a counterclockwise rotation. Since they're coming at the temple in a straight line, that does give it a chance to hold back the balloons for a decent bit, but pretty soon, they begin circling around it, which makes the temple chase pretty badly until the balloons have completed one full loop plus an extra path, as they exit on the path that's next to the path that they entered on. The way this map is set up causes there to be a lot of rounds where it looks like the temple is going to lose, but then it just barely survives. Ultimately, it ended up being able to reach round 107, and the Dark Temple is actually really effective on these straight paths, as you can see here on round 109, which allowed it to get an extra 6 rounds on the first try before going 1 round further on the second, with round 114 being where it ultimately settled as well. Now with the map Jungle, we're back to having the temple chasing balloons on 2 different paths, and overall, there aren't really any good points for it to catch them either. This sort of reminds me of an inverted version of Alpine Lake honestly, with the way balloons travel around 2 really long loops and force the temple to chase the whole time. And thus, it ended up failing to round 106 without the vengeful ability, and with it, the temple got to round 108 on the first and second try before it just barely beat out Alpine Lake by getting to 109. Workshop is pretty similar to a lot of the other intermediate maps in that it splits the balloons up early on, this time having them going around a gear before they pass by the temple and split down 2 different paths, which makes it pretty hard for it to keep up with all the balloons. Thus, the temple ended up failing on round 109 without the vengeful ability, which is still just as far as the last map got with the ability, before reaching round 112 on the first, second, and third try. Now, Balloon of Clubs is very similar to Lonely Heart, only instead of traveling around the temple in the shape of a heart, it's now in the shape of a clover instead. Other than that, there isn't too much to say really. The temple has to mostly chase the balloons until they reach these sharp turns in the clover, which does allow the temple to catch them somewhat. It's also able to get them at the end of the track, right before they escape, but ultimately, this layout isn't very ideal, and thus, the temple failed to round 107 without the vengeful ability, and then proceeded to get to round 111 on the first try with it, and 112 on the second and third. Archipelago is another single lane map, and it has a little bend here at the beginning that stacks the balloons up a bit, and allows the temple to hold them back for a while. But after that, it has to chase them pretty much around the entire map. This bend in the track up here does help the temple out a little bit, but it doesn't do much to stop ZOMGs, and thus, it ended up failing to round 108 without the vengeful ability here. And with it, the temple ended up reaching round 112 on its first try, and couldn't get any further with the second or third. I think the last 3 maps in a row have all failed to this same round now. Balloon Circles is sort of an interesting map, in that it's a reference to the real life phenomenon of crop circles, and I just think it's cool when the game ties in something from the real world. And as for the temple, it's not a bad map either, with the first circle being a solid loop for it to catch the balloons on. However, once they started getting past this point, it does have to chase them on 2 different paths, which of course is really bad for the temple, and ultimately, it got to round 111 without the vengeful ability. And on its first try with it, round 111 had no ZOMGs at all, which is quite notable for such a high round, and the vengeful ability also got the temple a good bit further, bringing it to round 118 on the first attempt, which it couldn't surpass with the second or third. Slomom is actually a pretty decent map for the temple, with it having a single track that twists back and forth in the beginning, stacking a ton of balloons on top of each other, and allowing the temple to hold them back for a while. Once they pass that point, the temple is forced to chase a decent amount, but the balloons do also stack a little bit near the end of the track, which helps it out a little, and ultimately, the temple was able to reach round 121 without the vengeful ability, which is quite solid for an intermediate map. And with the ability, it was able to reach round 124 on the first attempt, 125 on the second, and 126 with the third. Snake River is yet another intermediate map that forces the temple to chase down the balloons on 2 different paths, but at least they get to join into one path early on, which continues down the rest of the track that way. This allows the temple to stop chasing back and forth, and it can hold back the balloons pretty well when they reach the bend at the bottom of the track, along with being able to shoot through multiple paths as it goes to catch them near the exit, which allowed the temple to reach round 116 without the vengeful ability, and then proceed to get 118 with it on the first try, and 120 on the second and third. Dockside is another single lane track, which is always better for the temple, and there's also a pier at the entrance that the balloons have to travel around, which allows it to hold them back for a decent bit. After that, they also have to come at the temple directly in a straight line, which of course is also great for it, but then it does have to chase them, although the exit is also lined up straight with the temple, which allowed it to clutch out a few more rounds when I thought it was going to fail. And in the end, the temple reached round 117 without the vengeful ability, which is pretty solid, and it got 2 more rounds with it on its first try, which it couldn't surpass after the second or third. Village Shore is a pretty interesting map, because it was actually inspired by the BTD6 menu screen, and the track itself is literally in the shape of a 6. I believe this map was added when BTD6 had just come out as well, so that's definitely a cool way to reference the newest game in the one that came before. But other than that, it's basically just a version of 3 times around, where the balloons only loop twice. However, this loop is a little bit bigger than the one on 3 times around, which allowed the temple to actually get to round 125 without its vengeful ability, just 1 round short of the temple on 3 times around. But with the vengeful ability, all it was able to do is tie the 126 mark with its first, second, and third attempt. And now, we are finally onto the last intermediate map in the game, Trick or Treat. This is another cool map, just because it's pretty unique, especially with the fact that it's actually set at nighttime, which gives the map a much different vibe than many of the others we played on so far. But for the temple itself, this map isn't quite as cool, as the layout forces it to immediately chase the balloons, although they do have to travel around this bend in the track when going through the first house, which is a great spot for the temple to shred through lots of balloons and hold them back. Beyond that, it has to chase again until they exit the third house and are lined up pretty well for the temple to shoot through many balloons at once, which definitely helps some and allowed it to reach round 115 without the vengeful ability before getting to 118 on the first, second, and third try with it. Our first advanced map of this video is going to be Cash Money, which is literally in the shape of a giant dollar, and just like I did with the first intermediate map, I've begun recording on round 50 because now I'm not exactly sure how far the temple is going to be getting to. Advanced maps are still long enough for it to do something solid, but this is where the game actually starts getting a bit difficult. As you can see, on this particular map, the balloons have to chase 2 different paths of balloons coming from opposite sides, which easily slip by it as they travel down the wavy parts of the dollar sign. But the balloons have to escape on the middle section, which has a straight path at the top and bottom that's perfectly lined up for the temple to fire down, so basically, it's relying on these paths to catch balloons before they're escaping, which of course, is never a good situation for the temple to be in. And thus, it ended up failing to round 104 without the vengeful ability, before getting to 105 on its first try with it, and then just 1 round short of tying Alpine Lake with round 107 on its second and third try. Egg Hunt has 2 paths of balloons that immediately cross over each other at the entrance, before going up each side of the egg-shaped track, with the left path traveling around the egg and the right path going through the crack in the middle of it. Thankfully, as the temple chases the outside path, it's also able to catch balloons on the inside path, which does help it out a little bit. However, the balloons going around the egg are really hard for the temple to catch and quickly begin to overwhelm it. Thus, it ended up losing on round 103 without the vengeful ability, and with it, the temple was able to reach round 108 on the first and second try before getting to 109 on its third. Now I'm thinking Day of the Undead could end up being the best advanced map in the entire game, since it only has 1 path, and it's a relatively long track for the advanced category as well. Additionally, the track forms the shape of a monkey's head, and these ears should provide solid loops for the temple to catch a lot of bloons. Or at least that's what I thought, as I quickly found that it wasn't long before the ZOMGs were already too powerful to be caught there, and thus, the temple actually failed on just round 104 without the vengeful ability. And with it, we ended up getting one extra round on the first attempt before making it to 107 with the second and third. So I'll admit, I was totally wrong with what I expected to happen here, but I also think Land's End is another map with solid potential. It's also a single lane track with a decent track length, and the balloons have to come straight on at the temple from the entrance. Now I'll admit, that didn't do much to hold back ZOMGs, but this track also has a really big loop at the halfway point, which we all know is always great for the temple. And sure enough, this became the first advanced track where the tempo surpassed round 110, and it didn't even need the vengeful ability to do so. In fact, it got all the way to round 113 without it, before getting to 114 on the first try, 115 on the second, and 116 on the third. I think that's the first time the rounds went up by exactly 1 on every single try. Now I'm honestly getting kinda surprised by the number of single lane advanced maps that we've gotten so far, as Tidal Pools is yet another one, and I also think it has some decent potential as it features 2 prominent partial loops, which of course are always good for the temple. And sure enough, this was the second advanced map where it could break the 110 mark, getting to round 111 without the vengeful ability. Then, on its first try with it, the temple failed at the same round, but its second attempt made up for this by getting all the way to round 115, and then it tied Land's End by getting to round 116 on the third. Now we have yet another advanced map with a single lane, but this one is a little bit different. Bigfoot is literally, well, a big foot that the balloons have to travel around. But they don't complete a loop around it. Instead, they alternate between the top and bottom path every round and head directly to the exit. The tempo can catch the balloons at the entrance and a little bit on the track, but it mainly has to chase them. However, the tempo still managed to tie our worst map so far, River Rapids, without the vengeful ability at round 105, before getting to 107 on its first and second try with it, and then getting to round 109 on its final try. This next map, Igloos, also switches the balloons between 2 different paths. However, they are both much longer and give the temple a few good opportunities to actually hold the balloons back for a while, like this small loop down here, or this part of the track where the balloons have to come at the temple head on. And thus, this ended up being another really solid advanced map, with the temple getting all the way to round 114 without the vengeful ability, before setting a new record with round 117 on its first try, which it unfortunately could not beat with the second or third. Battle Knots is the first map we've encountered that actually has the balloons coming from 3 different paths at once, which of course is quite difficult to defend against. However, on this map, the 3 paths sort of intertwine and wrap around the temple, which helps it shred through a lot of balloons at once. Still though, this certainly wasn't the best map for it, as the temple failed to round 108 without the vengeful ability, before getting to 109 on the first try with it, and then 110 on the second and third. Candyland takes things to the next level by having the balloons come from 4 different paths, with them forming these 2 spirals on each side of the temple. And it basically has to rely on those spirals in order to even survive basically anything here, as the temple ended up failing on just round 93 without its vengeful ability. But just like on River Rapids, where the temple had failed around 95, the vengeful ability did make a huge difference because it was facing relatively easy free play rounds, which allowed it to add another 9 rounds to the temple's score on its first attempt, before getting to round 104 on the second and third, leaving Candyland as the new worst map by just a single round. But I think this next map we're on might be the toughest advanced map in all of BTD5. Crypt Keeper starts off looking pretty tame, with the entrance having a small straight path for the temple to fire down before it splits into 2 paths. But after that, things get a little more interesting. The balloons don't have to travel far to reach these huts at the end of each path, and upon entering them, they're then able to exit on 5 different paths per hut for 10 total. And basically as soon as we got into free play, the temple failed on just round 87. And unlike the River Rapids or Candyland one, the Vengeful Temple here can't do much of anything to help. In fact, it still failed to round 87 on the first try, before getting to 88 on the second, and you can literally see that even when the ability is active, balloons keep on escaping on all the different paths, and then the temple got one more round with its third attempt, ultimately settling on a record low of just round 89, being the first temple to not even make it to 100. Normally, long range would also be one of the hardest advanced maps, but the temple happens to have a very long range itself, so this map's main gimmick isn't an issue. Additionally, this bend in the beginning of the track is pretty great for holding back the balloons. However, once they get past it, the balloons are basically one strong push away from ruining the temple's day, as it has to chase them all the way to the exit, and then it's forced to keep struggling to survive from there. Thus, the temple ended up failing to round 106 without the vengeful ability, and then it also failed there on its first try with it, before getting to 108 on the second and third try. On Water Hazard, the temple has to fight the balloons off on 2 different paths for quite a long time, but at the very least, these paths are quite long, and basically, they're both just giant turns, which stacks 2 lanes of balloons on top of each other for a while. Additionally, the 2 paths do eventually merge into one and cross a dock, which forces them to come straight at the temple, and then they have to actually travel around it on a tiny island that you can't even see because the temple is on top of it. But as you can see here on round 108, this allows the temple to not just catch the balloons that are circling it, but also hit all the balloons that are traveling down the 2 big turns as well. Thus, this was another really good advanced map, with the temple reaching round 113 without the ability. Then it actually failed to the same round with it, before managing to get to round 114 on the second try and 115 on the third. Rink Revenge has a layout that reminds me of the map Igloos, with 2 different paths to defend that are both long and winding. Only the 2 paths on this track are almost identical to each other. Although it didn't take me long to realize, this map is actually worse than Igloos was, because there aren't really any points for the temple to actually catch balloons, leading to it losing on round 104 without the vengeful ability. And with it, the temple ended up getting to round 108 on its first and second try, before ultimately settling on 110. Challenger Deep is another map that's inspired by a real life place with the same name, and it's actually the deepest known point in the entire ocean and on Earth itself. So that's always pretty cool to see, but the actual map itself isn't so great for the temple, as it forces it to pretty much chase the balloons around the entire map. The temple can catch them a little bit at the top left corner here, but ceramics in particular are pretty bad for the temple here, forcing it to waste time chasing them down, and thus, it ended up failing on just round 98 without the vengeful temple ability. And with it, we did get to round 104, and then 105 with the second try, and 107 on the third, which is a pretty notable improvement. In a way, this next map, Scorched Earth, is kind of like Battleknot in that 3 paths come at you at once, and then all intertwine around the temple, but the big difference is that this map has a much more geometric layout. Well, I quickly discovered another difference as well, which is that the balloons have to spend a lot more time in the cluster, which of course helps the temple a ton. In fact, this quickly became the best advanced map so far, with it being able to first surpass the round 120 mark without even needing the Vengeful Temple ability, and ended up getting to round 121, and then with the ability, the temple just barely survived on round 122 with 3 lives to its name, before failing on round 123 with all 3 tries. U-Turn is another map that forces the temple to immediately chase 2 different paths, which of course is always terrible for it, and it doesn't really have a good way to catch them either, until the 2 waves of balloons overlap each other while making the big turn on the track, and this did allow the temple to hold off the balloons for a bit, but pretty quickly, they were beginning to overwhelm it, and the temple actually managed to just barely survive round 99 with only 6 lives left before failing 1 round later. With the Dark Temple ability, it got to round 104 on its first and second try before getting 1 extra round with its final attempt. The Great Divide doesn't let you be objective with placing your temple in the center, so you're forced to end up neglecting one of the 2 paths, but honestly, this didn't end up mattering nearly as much as I expected, and instead, the map was simply difficult for the same reason any other 2-lane map is, especially when there aren't many spots to catch the balloons. It can get them where they're going around these bends, but that only helps so much, and it ended up failing around 97 without the Vengeful Temple, before getting to round 106 on it with its first try, which definitely is more impressive, but it also failed there on its second and third. The eye looks like it's pretty similar to Battleknot, but balloons only come from one of the 4 paths at a time, and they're all relatively short as well. Unlike on Country Road, the paths now switch every round in a clockwise rotation, and the beginning of each path is lined up relatively well with the temple for it to hold back the balloons for a decently long time. Once they get past it though, the balloons make a sharp turn around the temple, which can be worse depending on which path you're on. It's also pretty hard for the temple to catch all the fast moving ceramics, and it ended up getting to round 112 without the Vengeful ability, which is definitely solid for an advanced map, before failing to 112 again, and you can actually see here, this is probably the hardest of the 4 paths for actually catching balloons on that turn. Then it managed to reach round 114 on the second try, and ultimately failed there on the third as well. Phase Portals is a really long advanced map, but the temple had to immediately chase the balloons for the entirety of the first 2 paths. However, the third path is where things get a lot more interesting, as it's a perfectly straight line that faces the temple head on, which allows it to directly fire down it and thus destroy a ton of balloons at once. This allowed the temple to reach round 112 on its first try without the Vengeful ability, before it proceeded to get another 6 rounds on its first try with it, and 118 is also where it ultimately settled. Lightning Scar is the same map from the Wizard Lord special mission in this game, and the entrance allows the temple to hold hold the balloons back for a decent bit, but what's even more effective is the zigzag that the balloons do right after that point, as it stacks a bunch of them on top of each other and allows the temple to keep them from getting to the point where they can split into two different paths for quite a while. Once the balloons do reach that point, they also have to come at the temple head on from each path, which helps it a little bit as well, and ultimately allow this to be another really impressive advanced map, as the temple reached round 118 without the vengeful ability, before getting to round 121 on its first and second try with it, and then 122 on its third, just one round short of Scorched Earth. This next map, Switch, forces the balloons to come down a long straight path directly at the temple, which of course allows it to hold the balloons back for a while. However, once they get past that point, this map has a cool feature where the pipes actually switch, well, hence the name, meaning that the balloons alternate between the top path, the bottom path, and both. Certainly, only dealing with one path of balloons is a lot better for the temple, as you can see here between round 107 where it's chasing one path and round 108 where it's chasing both, and pretty soon after this point, the temple ended up losing for the first time on round 113 without its ability, and then it proceeded to lose to 114 on the first try with it, and honestly, I think that the bottom path is also worse than the top one now, because it forces the temple to chase a lot more, and then it ended up losing to 115 on the second try with a ton of ZOMGs, before also losing to that round again on its third try. Mount Magma is another map that doesn't allow the temple to be very close to the center of it, but this one is pretty good for the temple because all of the balloons come out of an active volcano in a spiral formation, which of course stacks a ton of balloons on top of each other. This allowed Mount Magma to be one of the stronger advanced maps, but once the balloons get to the last loop of the spiral, they'll begin escaping on 4 different paths, which is where the temple is quickly going to fail. Ultimately, it got to round 116 without the vengeful ability, before getting to 118 on its first try with it, and then to round 120 on its second and third. And now, we are on to the last advanced map of BTD5, Siege, which has the balloons coming at the temple from 4 different paths, and they all pass directly by it, not giving the temple any good chance to catch the balloons. Thus, you can see the temple is already struggling to deal with ZOMGs in the very early free play rounds, and it ended up losing to round 97 without the vengeful ability, before failing to the same round 2 more times with it, and then ultimately, it settled on round 98 with its final attempt. The first expert map of the video, Tributaries, also has 4 paths to defend, but the difference is that they all merge into one at the end, which is very helpful for the temple. And pretty soon, it was able to surpass the last map we just played, Siege, without even needing the vengeful ability, getting to round 106, and then, on its first try with the ability, the temple got to round 107, before making it to round 108 on its second and third try. And once again, the balloons are coming at the temple from 4 different paths with this next map, Double Cross. But each path does have to come straight at the temple, which definitely helps it some, and additionally, it can also catch the balloons as all 4 paths cross over the temple at once. Of course, the temple is also firing down straight paths as it chases the balloons towards the exit, and thus, it was able to get to round 105 without the vengeful ability, before making it to round 108 on its first try with it, which the temple could not surpass with its second or third. Tunnels is often considered to be the easiest expert map in BTD5, and it's pretty easy to see why that's the case. Moab class balloons can still be hit even when they're entering the tunnels, which makes this map longer than some of the intermediates I'm pretty sure, and additionally, there's not anything else to make this map challenging, with it actually being a single lane track, and the middle path actually comes at the temple head on as well. This allowed it to become the first expert map to surpass the round 110 mark without even needing the vengeful ability, ultimately failing to round 114, and then the temple was able to complete another 6 rounds on its first try with it, which is absolutely insane to think an expert map can get to round 120, but it could not get any further with that second or third try. Castle is definitely a lot harder for the temple, as it has to chase down 2 different paths of balloons without any good points to catch them. And these 2 paths do merge at the very end, but it's not very much to help the temple out, which led to it failing on just round 89. Although this early of a free play round isn't normally so difficult, which is why we do 3 tries with the Vengeful Temple. And with it, we were able to get all the way to round 96 on the first try, 98 on the second, before settling on exactly round 100 with the third. Clock is an interesting map because the time on it actually changes every round, with the little hand of the clock determining when the balloons have to go from the inside to the outside of the track. The temples can catch some balloons at the beginning as well, since they have to come in it in a straight line, but pretty soon, it was clear that the temple has to rely on that part where the balloons are actually making the transition between the 2 tracks. At first, I thought that having the little hand at the 12 position was actually going to be really bad, since the balloons travel all the way around the inside track getting chased, and then escape straight to the exit, and there were some leaks here on round 108, but the temple survived, and I quickly realized having it at the 1 position is actually a lot worse, as the ceramics have gained a good bit of speed at this point, which allowed them to escape on the outside track immediately. And even with the Vengeful Temple, we could not get past round 109 with all 3 tries, which I think is only the second time that that's happened during this entire video. Drag Strip is a pretty cool map, and for me, it brings back some childhood memories of actually going to a drag strip in real life, and you can even see the 2 cars zoom by at the start of each round. But for the temple, this map definitely isn't so cool, as it forces it to chase 2 different paths without any really good points to catch them. Thus, it quickly begins struggling with ZOMGs as they gain speed and health every round, leading to it losing on round 101 without the Vengeful ability, before getting to 105 on its first try with it, which the temple could not surpass with the second or third. Death Valley is well known for being one of the harder maps in BTD5, because it not only has 2 paths to defend at once, but one of them happens to be pretty tiny, and thus, the temple almost immediately failed once free play started and it had to defend tougher balloons on the small path. With the Vengeful ability, we were able to get to round 91 on the first try and 92 on the second, which is where the temple also failed with its third. Treetop is kind of like Drag Strip in the sense that 2 different passive balloons come at the temple at once without any real good points to catch them. But the difference here, other than the scenery of course, is that these paths are a bit longer and much more winding. I also realized that the bottom path seems to be worse, and it's actually because the temple can still hit balloons passing by on the top path as it's chasing balloons at the bottom, which leads to that being where the temple ends up failing. Although not as quickly as I had expected, as it was able to survive to round 106 without the Vengeful ability, and then it did fail to the same round on the first try with it, before managing to get to round 107 on the second try and 108 on the third. This next map, Runway, looks really cool with it being set at nighttime, because you get to see all the lights on the track. But this is yet another map that has the temple chasing 2 different paths of balloons at the same time, and it can hold them back at the entrance during the early free play rounds, but soon it's forced to begin chasing and rely on this bend to catch the balloons on the inside track. The temple ended up getting to round 106 without the Vengeful ability, which is the same as the last map, and then it went on to get to round 108 on its first try with the ability and 109 on the second and third. Down the Drain doesn't let you place your temple in the center at all, so I had to choose the spot that I thought was the most objective for it, but this is the first time where I'm not even sure if the temple will make it to free play, because this is one of the hardest maps in all of BTD5. It's sort of like a warm-up for tar pits in a way, as there are 4 different short paths you have to defend at once, and for the temple, it's forced to chase the entire time on all 4 of them. And you can see this is already happening with the round 43 ceramics, but the temple did manage to get into free play with only a few lives lost, and surprisingly, actually didn't fail until round 89 either. And with the Vengeful ability, we did fail to the same round again, but ended up getting to 91 on the second try, along with the third. That's really insane to think that Crypt Keeper was even worse than this map is for the temple. Bengalia is another map that's based on a real life place, this time a city in the country of Angola. I believe that city also has a lot of ocean and is known for its coastlines, which is why the map looks the way it does. It's also another tough map for the temple, with 3 short paths that breeze right by it, giving the temple no good chances to catch the balloons. However, this still wasn't quite as bad as the last map we just faced, and thus, the temple was still able to get to round 94 without the Vengeful ability, and with it, we did get another 3 rounds on the first try, before ultimately settling on round 99 after the second and third attempt. But this next map, Web, is a whole lot better for the temple, as balloons are only following a single path for the entire track, and I didn't even realize that there's any expert tracks like that besides tunnels. But also, the beginning of the track is perfectly set up for the temple to hold back balloons for a really long time. Once the balloons have to begin navigating through the web, they get stacked on top of each other as well, which of course is also great for the temple, and this allowed it to get all the way to round 119 without the Vengeful ability, where the temple just barely failed, and with its ability, it got up to round 124 on the first, second, and third try. And now, we're on to the last expert map in BTD5, Forest Path. And this is another map with 2 short paths that the temple has to chase, and it can't really take advantage of this part on the bottom path where the balloons come at the temple head on, because it also has to chase the balloons on the top path at the same time, which end up going through a tunnel and subverting the temple's priorities even more, and all of this led to it quickly getting overwhelmed on round 92. Then, it first lost to round 94 with the Vengeful Temple ability, but it went on to get all the way to round 102 on its second attempt, as I was able to use the ability to clear out ZOMGs right before they would overwhelm the temple, and then it was able to get to round 104 on the final attempt. The first extreme map of the game is called Campfire, which doesn't sound so extreme until you see the actual track layout. The temple has to defend 3 different short paths at once, and it was still able to reach the free play rounds here without any issues. However, the early free play rounds were already posing a big challenge, and it wasn't long before the temple had failed for the first time on round 91. before managing to reach 95 on its first and second try, and then 96 on its third, which is pretty crazy that an extreme map can still perform better than the hardest advanced one. And Toxic Waste isn't quite as bad for the temple as Campfire was either, as there are 4 paths that come directly at it, but they do form 2 spirals before exiting in the center of them. So this does allow the temple to hold off Bloons for a little bit, although they're relying on the section of the track where Bloons are constantly about to escape, which led to it still failing on round 93. Then it also failed to round 93 again with its first try with the Vengeful Temple, but we did manage to get to round 97 on the second try and 99 on the third. And now we have finally made it to the hardest map in all of BTD5, Tar Pits. It's a name that strikes fear into the hearts of many a BTD5 veteran, not including myself though, cause I don't think I was ever good enough to even beat it on Flash, and you can easily see why this map is so difficult, with the temple having to defend 5 tiny paths at once that are literally just circles where it has to chase the Bloons constantly. So, just like with Down the Drain, I really began to wonder if this would finally be the map where the temple fails before free play. For a while, I really started to think it might not even happen here, as the temple was looking comfortable for most of the game. But, on round 84, which always has 50 Moabs and 10 BFBs, it did actually fail without the Vengeful Temple ability. With it, we were able to get through round 84, and the temple also survived the first ZOMG, but it probably failed to round 86 once again. After that, I was surprised when the temple did survive rounds 86 and 87 before failing to 88 on its second and third try, which is amazing to think that Tar Pits was only 1 round short of Crypt Keeper. Now we're going from the hardest map in all of BTD5 to the easiest of all the extreme maps. Main Street actually gives the temple a chance to shoot down the 2 paths that are coming at it, so I have to say, it honestly looked decently comfortable during the early free play rounds. To be fair, the temple did lose to round 99 without the Vengeful ability, but this already ties Toxic Waste for the highest round of any extreme map, and with the ability, we got an insane amount of mileage, as it did a great job of destroying ZOMGs on both the paths before they could pass the temple, which allowed it to get all the way to round 109 on its first try, and then to 110 on the second and third, which is actually better than all but 2 of the expert maps. And this feels so good to say, we are finally on the very last map in Bloons Tower Defense 5. Well, at least all the single player ones. Just like Main Street, Bloontonium Lab is not completely terrible for the temple. There are 3 different paths it has to defend on this map, but they all come at the temple straight on, and then have to escape on another path just like it. And the temple was able to get to round 96 without the Vengeful ability, however, it would prove not to be as powerful here as it had been on the last map, as we only got to round 98 on the first and second try with it, before ultimately getting to round 100 with the third. And that is it. A max temple on every single map in Bloons Tower Defense 5. No joke, I spent 55 hours in the last 4 days getting this video ready in time to upload, and I was already on the intermediate maps at that point. So yeah, this was quite the effort, and if you look on screen, you'll see the top 25 maps overall, and that letter in parentheses just stands for whichever difficulty the map was, but what I'm going to do here is actually explain the stream I was talking about in the beginning of this video, while also showing the leaderboards for each individual difficulty. So, it's going to be 4 AM Pacific time or 7 AM Eastern Standard Time that I start, but I'm going to be going for 24 hours, which I believe should be a record for a Bloons dedicated stream, and I plan to include several different games of course, but also, there's going to be a lot of viewer engagement as well. I'm going to have ways incorporated for you to actually add random disasters to my game, for example, like I could be trying to beat random missions in BTD5, but if I gain a certain amount of subs, I'll spin a wheel, and that could force me to beat the challenge with, let's say, only 1 tower, just as a random example. And like, there would be actual weight to it, because I won't be allowed to skip that mission unless someone else, let's say, gifts a channel membership to undo any disaster of their choosing. That way, viewers can have an impact on how easy or difficult my experience is, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this goes. I greatly appreciate anyone who's watched to the very end, and if you enjoyed this video, you might also want to know how far all of the special agents can make it in Bloons Tower Defense 5. Today we're going to find out what would happen if the monkeys went on strike in BTD5. This means that I can only use towers that function independently of them, like the tax shooter and the bomb tower. I want to give a quick shout out to Shy Guy, Mask, and Subchub, as they both have videos where they've beaten every BTD game without monkeys, but when it came to BTD5, they used beginner maps. So my goal today is to see just how difficult of a map I can beat without any help from a single monkey. And if you've been enjoying the recent content, I'd really appreciate a subscription, as only around 6% of people who watch currently are. Now I don't want to start off with a map that's way too difficult and embarrass myself, so I'll go with the advanced map called Day of the Undead. which probably should be put into intermediate if we're being honest. Now I have to think about which of my non-monkey towers would be best to start with. The tack shooter could be decent in this curve, but it would probably miss at least a few of the balloons early on, and I'm playing on impoppable, which means I can't lose any lives at all. Starting off with a bomb tower or a balloon shipper as your first tower is just a bad idea, honestly, because they both attack too slowly. So that leaves us with the spike factory. I'm just gonna put it back as far as I can, and like I said before, Day of the Undead is definitely one of the easiest advanced maps in the game, considering it has a pretty long track and only one path to defend, both of which are a huge advantage for our spike factory here. My goal is to save up for a farm now, which is $1,200. I just can't use any banana farmers to collect the bananas for me, as those are definitely monkeys. This 0-0 spike factory is really holding things down, which allowed me to save up the necessary money to get my first farm, along with upgrading it into a 1-0. But I can tell the balloons are about to overrun the factory now, so I've got to go for the bigger stacks upgrade. I really thought these blue balloons were about to take me out before I could even afford it, but somehow we barely survived. Now with the factory as a 1-0, I can focus on farming again. Let me upgrade this farm into a 2-0, which will more than double its income production. Once again though, the balloons are getting too strong for the spike factory, so now I'm gonna get the faster production upgrade. With that, I can save up for my second farm, and I gotta say, this run is off to a pretty good start. I figured I would get the white hot spikes upgrade, which the factory needs in order to pop lead balloons, just a bit early, so I don't forget about it on round 28. Now I'm gonna take a risk and try upgrading my second farm into a 2-0 before I invest in any more defense, and hopefully the balloons aren't gonna become too intense. Well, I guess I should have realized round 27 was going to end up being a bit too much with all these yellow balloons. So begrudgingly, I have to immediately sell the farm I just bought so that I can get the even faster production upgrade on my spike factory, and I'll use my remaining money to get another 1-0 farm, which is what I should have just kept in the first place. Hopefully the 2-2 factory is enough, because otherwise I'm really going to look like a fool here. Alright, we got past the yellows this time, and the rest of the round just has weaker balloons. Now I think it's safe to upgrade my second farm again, but after that, I definitely want to get the spiked ball upgrade, because that will make this factory substantially more powerful than it already is. I'll also be facing the first ceramic balloons on round 40, and spiked balls do extra damage to those as well. That's especially useful here, because ceramics actually have 50% extra health when you're playing on impoppable mode. This allowed me to get a couple more farms without having to worry about the balloons, and even though I don't need to, I'm gonna get a second factory now that I'll work on upgrading while I continue to farm. By the time round 40 came, I had it upgraded into a 3-2 as well, and you can see the first ceramic balloons were absolutely no problem at all. So I'm gonna keep on getting more farms, and I'm not exactly sure when it makes sense to sell all your 2-0s and get a 4-2, but I know that point is coming soon. But let's see how these two factories can fare against the round 46 Moab first. Honestly, that wasn't all that bad, but I think I gotta get more defense now because, yeah, round 47 is a little too strong. Thankfully though, I do have $3,000 to work with, so I'll invest that into a 1-1 factory, and it looks like this is just going to barely be enough to make it through the tough part of round 47, so I'm going to upgrade this one into a 3-2 before doing anything else with the farms. For some reason, I didn't immediately get a banana factory after that, but instead, I upgraded a farm into a 3-0 in anticipation of making it a 4-2, and then I got another 3-2 spike factory first. After that though, I did finally sell some 2-0 farms so that I could afford to get my first banana factory. I guess it makes sense that without any monkeys to fight, automated factories are having to take over now. Now that I'm past round 50, I should also start investing in 2-3 bomb towers, because the Moab Mauler upgrade is incredibly powerful against Moab class balloons, especially for its price. You can see they do nothing against the ceramics, but the Moabs are losing a ton of health every time they get hit. Although I should have anticipated what would happen with regrow balloons, as they actually created a regrow farm on round 56 that was able to overrun my factories. So I'm going to sell the Moab Maulers for this round, and then rebuy them after that. I'll also get another factory just in case I need it. That was more than enough to destroy all the regrow rainbows this time, along with the Moabs that followed. Now I'm going to start filling this little area with the Moab Maulers again, and I should also make sure to start farming some more as well while I can afford to do so. Round 59 is more intense than I expected, but thankfully, the factories did pull through, and now we have the first BFB on round 60, which these Moab Maulers Maulers are making pretty good progress on. They did more than enough damage for the Spectres to clean up the rest, but round 61 has a ton of regrows again. And I stupidly got the frag bomb upgrade on all my Moab Maulers, which is the only reason the bomb towers can even pop these regrow zebras in the first place. But I'm gonna try getting the spiked mine upgrades on one of my spike factories and see if that can help out, and it looks like that actually is making the difference here. But I'm also gonna have to be prepared for the round 63 ceramics, and well, clearly I was not. But I just realized something kind of funny. I never bothered activating my Spike Factory Specialist building, which allows all Spike Factories to pop 50% more balloons than normal. I'm also going to get a 4-2 bomb tower as soon as I can afford it and have it set to strong, as this will give it the balloon impact upgrade. And now that I have it, you can see it's able to stun a good bit of the ceramics, which gives the Spectres more time to cover the track. This was easily enough to take down round 63 this time, and after that, things are going pretty smoothly. Round 65 hit you with a ton of ceramics, and then 3 Moabs and 2 BFBs, and none of this ended up being an issue whatsoever. And with 4 banana factories, I'm already generating an extra $12,000 per round, so I have plenty of money for more defense and more farms if I want to get them as well. Those 4 banana factories quickly multiplied into 8, and this allowed me to get a bunch of extra Moab Maulers and even a couple more spiked mine factories, which are a very expensive tower for this game. That upgrade alone costs $15,000 on impoppable mode. I can't see any way I could lose now, considering how powerful my defense is. Wait. Round 76 is seriously still too strong? Well fine, I'll get a few more balloon impacts and see if that helps. It's still gonna be close, but I think this is enough, and yeah, we have prevailed this time. Although I'm gonna need to prepare for the camo ceramics on round 78, since bomb towers can't hit those. I considered using a monkey village for a second to give my bomb towers camo detection, because it doesn't technically show a monkey, but like, monkey is literally in the name, so that definitely would be cheating. But once the camo ceramics actually came out, I realized I worried for nothing because they got destroyed by all the spiked mines anyways. Since it came at the end of round 78 instead of the beginning, the track was already way too covered in spikes. Now all I really have to do is continue investing in defense and prepare for the 5 ZOMGs that come out on round 85. Instead of buying a million more Moab Maulers, alright, calm down Dr. Seuss, I'm just gonna upgrade all my existing ones into Moab Assassins, which gives them an activated ability that does a ton of damage to Moab class balloons at once. Round 84 is going down well, which is always a good sign, considering it has 50 Moabs and 10 BFBs. But alright, here we go, I'm just gonna spam all the abilities at once, and it looks like that basically did the trick. Yeah, there we go. I just beat an advanced map that admittedly is relatively easy without any monkeys. I started looking for more difficult maps that I could attempt the same strategy on when I stumbled upon the perfect candidate, an expert map called Tunnels. As the name suggests, the main gimmick of this map is that the balloons spend a lot of time traveling through, well, tunnels, and they can't be hit when they're inside of them. But you see, the Spike Factory doesn't care about line of sight. So let's see what happens if I try the same strategy I used last time. I'm pretty sure this map is actually a good bit longer than the last one was, so I'm definitely feeling pretty good right now about my chances. In fact, I was able to get my first farm earlier this time, as the balloons weren't getting anywhere close to overpowering the 00 Factory yet. I didn't even have to bother upgrading it until round 18, and I did so here because the green balloons did nearly make it through. But just to really highlight the difference between this map and the last one, last time I failed on round 27 because I upgraded my second farm to a 2-0 instead of upgrading the Spactory to even faster production. Whereas this time, I'm already upgrading my third farm into a 2-0, and the yellow balloons are not making it past the 1-1 Spactory this time either. Of course, I do have to get white hot spikes for the leads that are coming out in a second, but honestly I think the monkey should have quit a long time ago because this is almost going too well. I already had my first banana factory before I even had to face the Moab on round 46, and by round 60, I had 7 of them. Oh, well, actually, make that 8. Last time round 63 did sneak up on me, but this time around, it's gonna get crushed. Same goes for round 65, and by round 76, things have gotten pretty out of hand when it comes to my farms, but the dense wave of regrow ceramic balloons also pose no threat for my army of Spactories. Since I have such a ridiculous amount of money now, I'm gonna upgrade all of them to spiked mines, and I think I have over $1 million worth of towers deployed at this point. Not to mention around 100k worth of income generation per round. I never even bothered getting Moab Maulers this time because I just haven't had any need for them. I mean, look at the way round 84 is getting shredded. And sure enough, the ZOMGs move slowly enough to give all these factories ample time to completely cover the track in mines, which easily dealt enough damage to shred through all the ZOMGs, allowing us to be an expert map while the monkeys continue their strike. Now I really want to know if this could somehow be possible on an extreme map, so I booted up Main Street to give it a shot. This map has two paths to defend, but they intersect with each other, so if I put a Spectre at that intersection, it should be able to defend both paths. And would you believe me if I told you? No, I'm just kidding, it failed on round 3. But in theory, if I try again, the result could be different, since the Spectre throws down piles randomly. And sure enough, this time, it put them down in the right spot to catch every Bloon. The same thing happened on round 5, and then on round 6, and in fact on the second try, I actually had to use one of my free piles of road spikes to keep a green Bloon from escaping. So I'm going to get faster production before getting the bigger stacks upgrade this time, because that should help it to catch more of the Bloons. Doing that allowed me to stop losing every other round, so I figured that now I would also get the bigger stacks upgrade, because that one is the best value overall. And hopefully this 1-1 Spectre can hold up for a little bit, because I definitely need to start farming soon if I actually want to have any chance here. Well, so far it's survived another 4 rounds, which has allowed me to save up for my first farm, but just a couple rounds later, it is going to allow a regrow yellow to slip by. When I tried it again, I did need to use another free road spike pile, but then the Spectre kept on going for several more rounds, and I almost had enough saved up for a 2-0 farm when a pink Bloon slipped by on round 21. When I retried, it took another free road spike pile, then another one on round 22, another on 23, but at least I am getting the chance to farm right now, although I'm pretty worried about round 27, knowing that I even lost to it on an advanced map. Surprisingly though, it only took a few more free road spike piles to actually hold off the yellow Bloons, and everything else wasn't an issue. Of course I had to get the white hot spikes for round 28, and I figured I should also get the even faster production upgrade while I'm at it. Then I was able to upgrade my second farm to a 2-0 before I immediately died because I wasn't paying attention. Believe it or not, I then proceeded to somehow do the exact same thing on the very next round. I gotta find a better system where I'm not always thinking about the script as I'm playing the game. But it's also crazy how much differently a round can go when you actually get good RNG from your Spectre instead of bad RNG. Since I know round 33 is easy, I took the time to buy a third farm before upgrading my Spectre to a 3-2. Now things are starting to get a little bit better. I was able to upgrade my third farm, get a second Spectre, and even get a fourth and fifth farm going as well. I kept a close eye on round 40, because I know the ceramics are going to be tougher, but the 2 Spectres were even able to handle them. I'm actually starting to get a bit of confidence about this right now, but usually that's when things go wrong for me, so let's see. On round 43 I had the most annoying loss ever, where I just barely didn't catch all these escaping Bloons, and when I tried again, I was able to beat the round, but I had panicked and put a third Spectre in a dumb spot, so I sold it and moved it a whole 2 pixels over, which is obviously far superior. I actually lost to the Moab in the same annoying way, where I just barely didn't place down enough road spike piles to catch all the escaping Bloons. Now I wasn't taking any more chances, so I just spammed them down this time, and I definitely wasted some road spike piles, but that's better than losing for the 10th time in the same way. Oh, speaking of which, guess what I did again on round 47? At this point, I'm done playing games, so I'm just gonna get a 4-3-2 Spectre before I even think about farming again. In fact, let me get a couple Moab Maulers while I'm at it. Now this is looking much better. And finally, I can start upgrading my farms once more. On round 53, I sold the Moab Maulers to avoid creating a regrow farm because I thought that round 54 was the one that had regrow rainbows instead of round 56. This is the kind of stuff a normal person would cut out of their videos, but I really want you to truly experience the brilliance of my mind. But thankfully, that mistake didn't cost me, and it wasn't long before I could get down my first banana factory, and then a second one to boot. I ended up dying on round 57, so I sold the 5th Spectre I had just gotten so that I could rebuy a Moab Mauler, and you can see this made a huge difference. I figured I should also get a few more of them with the BFB quickly approaching, and I was surprised when it actually went down without a fight. In anticipation of round 63, I got down a 4-2 Bloon impact, but it's in a pretty terrible spot, so we'll see what happens. It looks like that's still going to be enough to slow down the first wave of ceramics, which gives me time to afford a second Bloon impact up here, and yeah, round 63 went off without a hitch. I made the risky decision of investing in a couple more 3-0 farms before getting any more defense for round 65, and I know you expected me to say this was a mistake, but no, this time it actually paid off. And even though I'm playing on an extreme map, it's hard to pretend like I have much chance of losing at this point. Even if a super difficult round comes up and totally easily blows past my defense, I can always sell a banana factory for 28,000, which is like 100,000 in BTD6. I got a couple more balloon impacts before round 76, and I honestly couldn't even believe my eyes when I saw how easily that it was going down. The one thing I am curious about though, is what will happen when I have to face the ZOMGs at the very end. Is there going to be enough time to destroy them? Well, I turned off auto start so that I could have more time to line the track with Moab Maulers, and by the time round 84 had rolled around, I amassed quite the army. I knew this was going to be powerful, but just like on round 76, I was surprised by just how powerful it actually is. You can barely even see the Moabs and BFBs. So now I'm thinking that 5 ZOMGs might be a bit tougher, but surely they're not going to make it all the way through. Well, oh boy was I wrong about that. So I retried and got some Moab Assassin abilities, which seemed to be doing pretty well, but to my surprise, this still didn't end up being enough to defeat everything. So then I sold a couple banana factories and got a spiked mines factory at the end of each path, along with getting a few more assassin abilities with my remaining money, and I was certain this would do it. But of course, I wouldn't be talking this way if that had been the case. So finally, I sold the rest of my banana factories, got 2 more spiked mines factories, a million more Moab assassins, and I made sure these ZOMGs were sorry that they were ever born in the first place. And yeah, that was enough to do it. Amazingly, I even ended the game with exactly $6,969, and if that doesn't deserve a like, I don't think I could ever earn one from you. And hey, now we know it's not only possible to beat BTD5 without monkeys, but you can even beat an advanced, expert, and extreme map all without their help.